are moments when you find yourself searching for something extraordinary, some revelation that will finally make you feel complete. And in that searching, you miss what's already here. The breath you're taking, the softness of the pillow beneath your head, the simple fact of being alive, right now, in this unremarkable moment. Tonight, we explore a truth that has echoed through Buddhist temples for centuries. A truth so ordinary that we often overlook it completely. Enlightenment isn't hidden in mountaintop monasteries or buried in ancient texts. It's right here, woven into the fabric of washing dishes and drinking tea, walking to work and saying good morning. If you find this video valuable and would like to support others in their journey toward rest, please consider subscribing. These stories tonight offer gentle reminders that the magic you seek is already present in the mundane details of your life. They come from Korean Seon masters who taught that ordinary mind is the way, from Vietnamese teachers who found peace in every step, from Japanese monks who discovered Buddha while sweeping floors, and from ancient teachings that whisper the same simple truth in 1,000 different ways. This video offers contemplative stories inspired by Buddhist wisdom, created for rest and reflection, not medical or therapeutic advice. So let your body settle. Feel the weight of the blanket, the coolness of the pillow. Notice your breath moving in and out, asking nothing of you. You don't need to become anything other than what you already are. Nothing special. Nothing more. Just this. And now, we begin. In 16th century Japan, in the city of Kyoto, where cherry blossoms fell like snow each spring, there lived a tea master named Rikyu. His name was whispered with reverence in aristocratic circles, spoken of in merchant houses, known even to farmers who would never taste the refined teas he prepared. Rikyu had spent 40 years perfecting his art, studying under the greatest masters, learning to arrange flowers with 3 movements instead of 5, to place a tea bowl so that its imperfect side faced the guest at precisely the right angle. His tea house stood in a garden designed to evoke mountains and valleys in the space of 20 footsteps. Moss grew deliberately on certain stones. A path of irregular stones led visitors through calculated spontaneity. Everything spoke of sophistication, of years devoted to understanding beauty in its most refined form. But Rikyu carried a weight that grew heavier with each passing year. At night, lying on his sleeping mat, he would review the day's ceremonies in his mind, finding fault in the angle of his wrist as he turned the tea bowl, imperfection in the pause before he'd added water. His students praised him. Nobles sought his instruction. The shogun himself had requested private ceremonies, yet Rikyu felt increasingly that he was performing an elaborate dance, moving further and further from something essential he could no longer name. He was 63 years old. His hands, though still steady, bore the marks of age. His back ached after long ceremonies. And lately, a question had begun to trouble his sleep. After all these years, do I even know what tea is anymore? One autumn afternoon, a messenger arrived at his gate. A letter, sealed with the mark of a distant monastery. Rikyu unfolded the rice paper and read the brushwork. Master Rikyu, I have heard of your skill and wisdom. I am traveling through Kyoto next week. Might this humble monk be permitted to experience one of your tea ceremonies? Signed, Sengai. Rikyu knew the name. Sengai was a Zen monk with an unusual reputation. He was not a great scholar, nor an abbot of any major temple. Stories told of his strange behavior, painting comic pictures of enlightened masters, writing poetry that made fun of serious practice, laughing at inappropriate moments. He was said to live in a small temple in the countryside, where he spent his days doing calligraphy for villagers and tending a vegetable garden. Some called him a fool. Others whispered that he had realized something that even great abbots had missed. Rikyu felt his stomach tighten. This would not be like serving tea to nobles who appreciated refinement without understanding it. This would not be like teaching students who saw only the surface beauty. A Zen monk, even an eccentric one, would see through any pretense. Would see, perhaps, the hollowness Rikyu himself had begun to sense in his perfect movements. For 3 days, Rikyu prepared. He selected his finest tea bowl, the one with the subtle crack repaired with gold lacquer. He arranged autumn leaves in a bronze vase, spending 2 hours positioning 3 leaves and 1 small branch. He practiced his movements until they flowed like water, inevitable and natural. He cleaned his tea house until not a single grain of dust remained visible. He prepared matcha from leaves picked on the perfect day of spring, ground by hand, stored in darkness. The morning of Sengai's visit, Rikyu woke before dawn. He swept the path again. He adjusted the stones. He changed the flower arrangement twice. His hands, so steady in ceremony, trembled slightly as he prepared the charcoal for heating water. Sengai arrived exactly on time, which somehow surprised Rikyu. The monk was shorter than expected, round-bellied, with laugh lines around his eyes. He wore simple robes that had been mended in several places. He carried no belongings except a walking stick. He bowed politely at the gate, and his bow was neither too deep nor too shallow, just ordinary, unremarkable. "Thank you for welcoming me," Sengai said, and his voice was warm and unaffected. Rikyu led him through the garden. He had choreographed this walk, timing it so they would pass the stone lantern at the moment when afternoon light fell across it beautifully. But Sengai walked at his own pace, neither hurrying nor lingering, and Rikyu found himself adjusting his steps awkwardly. At the tea house entrance, Rikyu gestured for Sengai to enter first, to assume the position of honored guest. Sengai ducked through the low doorway, designed to make everyone bow, to leave status outside, and settled onto the tatami mat. He looked around the room with what appeared to be simple curiosity. Not the studied appreciation of a connoisseur, but something closer to the way a child might look at a new place. Rikyu felt his preparation begin to crumble. All his rehearsed movements suddenly felt like a performance before an audience who had come expecting something else entirely. He began the ceremony. Each movement was perfect. He cleansed the tea bowl with precise gestures. He measured the tea powder with exactness. He ladled water that was heated to precisely the right temperature, not boiling, but just at the moment before boiling, when water knows its own nature. He whisked the tea into foam with the practiced rhythm of decades. 300 whisks. No more, no less, until the surface showed the texture of jade. He turned the bowl in his hands, presenting its finest side away from the guest, its humble floor toward the guest, as tradition demanded. He placed it before Sengai with a movement that had taken him 15 years to perfect. Sengai looked at the tea bowl. Then he looked at Rikyu. And then he did something no guest had ever done in Rikyu's tea house. He laughed. Not a mocking laugh. Not a polite chuckle. A genuine, delighted laugh that came from his belly and filled the small room. "Master Rikyu," Sengai said, still smiling, "this is the most complicated tea I've ever been served." Rikyu felt heat rise to his face. 40 years of practice, the shogun's own tea master, and this country monk was laughing at him. "I apologize if my preparation has offended," Rikyu began. "Offended?" Sengai shook his head. No, no. I'm honored. Truly. Such skill. Such perfection. But he picked up the tea bowl, not with the prescribed delicate rotation, but simply the way anyone might pick up a cup. May I ask you something? Rikyu nodded stiffly. Do you remember the first time you ever drank tea? The question struck Rikyu like a bell. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. When was that? He'd been a boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. His grandmother had given him tea. They'd been sitting in the kitchen. The cup had been cracked. The tea had been bitter. He'd made a face, and she'd laughed. I was a child, Rikyu said quietly. And how did it taste? Bitter. And you drank it anyway? My grandmother was there. She told me it would make me strong. Ah, Sengai said. He lifted the perfect tea bowl to his lips and drank. Not with the small, appreciative sips of ceremony, but in 3 or 4 swallows. He set down the bowl. That was good tea. Rikyu sat very still. In this moment, he could feel every detail of his elaborate preparation mocking him. The perfect flower arrangement, the precisely positioned tea bowl, the gold-repaired crack positioned just so. All of it suddenly seemed like layers and layers of meaning piled onto something that had once been simple. I have been practicing tea ceremony for 40 years, Rikyu said, and his voice came out barely above a whisper. I can tell, Sengai replied, not unkindly. I have served tea to the shogun, to great lords, to visiting monks from China. I'm sure they were impressed. And now you tell me I have made it complicated. Sengai was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Do you know why I wanted to visit you? Rikyu shook his head. Because I heard you were the greatest tea master in Japan. And I thought, perhaps he can teach me what I've been missing. I've been drinking tea every day for 30 years. Every morning in the temple, I boil water. I add leaves. Ipu. I drink. Sometimes I drink it while watching rain. Sometimes while talking with villagers. Sometimes alone in darkness before dawn. But I wondered if maybe I was doing it wrong. You know? If maybe there was a secret I had missed. And now? Rikyu asked. Now I see that the secret I was looking for doesn't exist. Or rather, it exists in exactly the place I'd been looking past it. Sengai gestured at the tea bowl. This is tea. Water and leaves. Heat and time. You can dress it in beauty, and you do. Magnificently. You can make it mean things about wabi-sabi and impermanence and the way of emptiness. But underneath all those meanings, it's still just tea. Hot water and leaves. Nothing more. Nothing special. Rikyu felt something crack open in his chest. Not the careful crack of a tea bowl repaired with gold to highlight its damage. A real crack. Sudden and complete. I have spent 40 years making it special, he said. I know, Sengai said gently. And your tea is extraordinarily beautiful. Your movements are like poetry. Your garden makes visitors gasp. But... He paused, and his eyes were kind. Does it taste better than the tea your grandmother gave you? The bitter tea in the cracked cup? Rikyu thought about that morning. The kitchen. The rough wood of the table. His grandmother's weathered hands around her own cup. The taste of the tea, bitter and hot. How she'd smiled at his expression. How she'd said, "You'll grow to love it." how he'd drunk it anyway, not because it was refined or meaningful, but because she'd made it for him. Because she was there. Because it was morning and they were together. "No," he said finally. "It doesn't." They sat in silence. Outside, a bird called. Wind moved through bamboo. The charcoal in the brazier shifted slightly, sending up a small breath of ash. "I have been so afraid," Rikyu said, surprised to hear himself speaking these words aloud. "Afraid that if I serve tea simply, without all this," he gestured at the room, "the arrangements, the perfection, it would just be ordinary. And after 40 years, how could I offer people something ordinary? But that's the thing," Singai said. "It is ordinary. Tea is completely, wonderfully ordinary. Millions of people drink it every day. Farmers drink it. Children drink it. Old women drink it while complaining about their neighbors. The way you prepare it doesn't make it extraordinary. It just makes it clear that you know it's extraordinary exactly as it is." Rikyu felt tears on his face. When had he started crying? He had not cried in decades. Tea masters did not cry. But here he was, 63 years old, weeping in front of a country monk who had drunk his perfect tea like water. "All these years," Rikyu said, "I thought I was refining it, perfecting it, getting closer to its essence. You were," Singai said. "You were. Every movement you practiced, every detail you perfected, you were learning to pay attention. That's what ceremony is for, isn't it? To help us notice what's already there. The problem is when we start thinking the ceremony is the thing itself. When we forget that we're just preparing hot water and leaves. When we make it so special that we lose sight of how special it already was." The afternoon light had shifted. It no longer fell across the stone lantern at the perfect angle Rikyu had calculated. It fell wherever it happened to fall. The flower arrangement was just 3 leaves and a branch. The tea bowl was just a bowl. And sitting across from him was just a monk. A man who drank tea every morning. Who probably sometimes burned his tongue and sometimes forgot and let it get cold. "Would you like more tea?" Rikyu asked. "Very much," Singai said. This time, Rikyu didn't count his whisks. He didn't position the crack at the precise angle. He didn't measure his movements against decades of training. He simply made tea. Hot water, green powder, a whisk, a bowl. He made it the way he imagined his grandmother might have made it. The way Sengai probably made it each morning in his country temple. Not special. Not ordinary. Just itself. He handed the bowl to Sengai. Sengai drank. "That," he said, "was perfect." The teaching lives in the simplest things we do. After decades of refining and perfecting, we sometimes forget that we began with something whole. We started with hot water and leaves, with breath and presence, with the simple fact of being alive. And then we add meaning. We add technique. We add layers of understanding until we can barely find the thing itself beneath all we've built around it. Think about your own life. How many of the things you do each day began as something simple and became complicated? Making dinner was once just about satisfying hunger, about the pleasure of taste, about sharing food with others. Now it might carry the weight of nutrition perfectionism, of unmet expectations, of comparing your meals to images you've seen online. Walking was once just moving your body through space, feeling the ground beneath your feet. Now it might be tangled up with step counts and fitness goals and the nagging sense that you should be doing it differently, better, more. Even breathing, the most ordinary act, the one thing you've done continuously since the moment you were born, even breathing becomes complicated. You learn it should be deeper, slower, more mindful. You learn techniques. You count. You measure. Until sometimes you find yourself lying awake at night, trying to remember how to do this thing your body has been doing perfectly well without your supervision for decades. The Zen masters speak of ordinary mind, not elevated mind, not enlightened mind. Ordinary mind. The mind that knows how to drink tea without making it mean something. The mind that walks without performing walking. The mind that breathes without trying to breathe better. This ordinary mind is our true nature. It's what we are before we add all the commentary. Before we make things special. Before we start trying to be something other than what we already are. Rikyu spent 40 years making tea special. And there was beauty in that real beauty. His students learned precision from him. His ceremonies created moments of genuine aesthetic experience. But somewhere, in all that refinement, he'd lost touch with the simple pleasure that had started it all. That bitter tea, that cracked cup, that morning with his grandmother. You might be carrying your own version of this. Maybe you learned to cook from someone who loved you, and those early meals were messy and imperfect and full of joy. Now you've read so many cookbooks, watched so many videos, internalized so many rules about what makes food good, that you stand in your kitchen feeling inadequate, forgetting that the real gift was never the perfect technique. It was the pleasure of feeding yourself and others, of working with your hands, of the smell of garlic in hot oil. Or maybe you loved to draw as a child. You made pictures without knowing anything about perspective or color theory or proper technique. You just drew what you saw, what you imagined, what you felt. And then you learned the rules. You saw how others did it better. You developed taste that outpaced your skill. And now, the blank page fills you with anxiety instead of possibility. This is not to say that skill doesn't matter, that refinement has no value. Rikyu's 40 years of practice taught him something real. But what it taught him, finally, was not how to make tea special. It taught him how to recognize that tea was already special exactly as it was. The ceremony, the beauty, the perfection, these were just ways of pointing at what was already true. They were the finger pointing at the moon. And he had been so focused on his perfectly positioned finger that he'd stopped looking at the moon itself. Let your body soften as you hear this. Feel the blanket beneath you, the pillow supporting your head. Notice your breath moving in and out, not trying to breathe better, just breathing the way you've been breathing all along. You don't need to make this moment special. It already is. The simple fact that you're alive, that you're here, that you're breathing, this is the miracle. Everything else is just tea ceremony. Beautiful, yes. Meaningful, yes. But not the thing itself. And here's what's even more freeing. When you stop trying to make moments special, they become special again. When Rikyu finally just made tea, no counting, no perfect angles, just hot water and leaves, that was when it became perfect. Not because he'd mastered something new, but because he'd returned to something he'd always known. He'd come back to ordinary mind. The mind that drinks tea. The mind that breathes. The mind that simply is, without trying to be anything in particular. You already know how to do this. You knew it before you learned you were doing it wrong. You knew how to eat without anxiety, how to move without self-consciousness, how to be yourself without effort. That knowing is still there, underneath all you've added on top of it. Tonight, as you rest, you might let some of those layers dissolve. The trying, the improving, the making things special. Just for these hours, just for now, you might return to ordinary mind. The mind that has always been here. The mind that is nothing special, and therefore everything. Let yourself rest for a moment. Notice the rise and fall of your chest. Feel the weight of your body against the bed. There's nothing you need to fix right now. Nothing you need to perfect. Just this breath. Just this moment. Just the simple, ordinary miracle of being alive. And as that perfection settles into your bones, we journey now to another time, another place, where a different kind of teacher discovered that enlightenment had been waiting in the most overlooked corner of her life. In the mountains of Korea, during the Goryeo dynasty, when monasteries clung to cliff sides like birds' nests, there lived a woman named Sunim. She had not been born with this name. She had been born as Myung, daughter of a merchant who sold ceramics in the market town below the mountains. But that life felt distant now, belonging to someone else entirely. Myung had come to the monastery 15 years ago, fleeing a marriage arrangement to a man 3 times her age. She'd arrived at the gates in darkness, 17 years old and terrified, carrying nothing but the clothes she wore and a desperate hope that the monks might grant her refuge. The abbot had looked at her with eyes that seemed to see through her fear to something she hadn't known was there. He'd given her robes, a sleeping mat, and a new name, Sunim. It meant simply monk or teacher, an ordinary title used for anyone who had taken vows. But Sunim had never become a teacher. She had never mastered meditation deeply enough to guide others. She attended the morning chanting and evening services like all monastics, but during the long meditation sessions, when others sat motionless for hours, exploring the depths of consciousness, Sunim's mind would not settle. Thoughts chased thoughts. Her knees ached. Her back cramped. After 20 minutes, she would be counting the moments until the bell released her. The senior monks were kind about it. Not everyone is called to deep practice. They said, the monastery needs all kinds of service. And so Sunim had found her place in the only role no one else wanted. She became the sweeper of the meditation hall. Every morning before dawn, while the other monks slept their last hour before the wake-up bell, Sunim would rise in darkness. She would light a small lamp and carry it to the meditation hall, that vast room with its polished wooden floor where monks sat in rows, pursuing enlightenment with fierce determination. Her job was to sweep this floor, to remove any dust, any leaf that had blown in, any imperfection that might distract a meditator from their practice. At first, she had hated this work. It felt like a punishment, a confirmation that she was not worthy of the real practice. While others explored the nature of mind, she pushed a broom. While others encountered the vast emptiness, she bent down to pick up fallen leaves. She was 32 years old now, and what did she have to show for 15 years of monastic life? A calloused hand from gripping a broom handle, knees that knew the hard floor intimately, the ability to sweep a large room in exactly 43 minutes. This morning was like any other morning. Sunim woke in the cold darkness. Her body ached, it always ached now. Her lower back had developed a persistent pain from the sweeping motion, repeated thousands of times over thousands of days. Her right shoulder clicked when she lifted her arm. These were the marks of her practice, if you could call it that. The stigmata of the cleaning woman. She lit her lamp. The small flame pushed back the darkness just enough to see the path to the meditation hall. Frost covered the ground. It was late autumn, approaching winter, and the monastery's thin walls offered little protection from the mountain cold. Sunim's breath emerged as white clouds. Her fingers were numb, even inside her robe sleeves. The meditation hall door opened with its familiar creak. She'd asked the maintenance monk to oil the hinges several times, but he always forgot. Small things, unimportant things, forgotten things, these were the textures of Sunim's life. She set down her lamp and picked up her broom. The same broom she'd used for 10 years, its bristles worn shorter on one side where she favored that angle, its handle smooth where her hand gripped it day after day. An old broom, an ordinary broom, nothing special. She began in the northeast corner, as she always did. Systematic, methodical, one section at a time. The broom whispered against the wood, swish, swish, swish. That sound had become the soundtrack of her life. How many hours had she listened to it? How many miles had she walked, following her broom across this floor? The dust gathered in small lines, grey against the dark wood. Not much dust today. There never was much she swept every morning. After all, sometimes she wondered if there was any point to it. The floor was already clean. She was sweeping clean floor, making it marginally cleaner, preparing it for monks who probably wouldn't notice whether she'd swept or not. But this was her practice, such as it was. This was what she offered to the monastery. While others offered wisdom and teaching and deep meditation, she offered clean floors. While others pursued enlightenment, she pursued dust. Swish, swish, swish. 20 minutes into her work, Sunim paused. A thought had surfaced. Not for the first time. What am I doing with my life? 15 years. 15 years of sweeping this floor. And what had changed? She was not enlightened. She had not mastered her mind. She could not sit in meditation without her thoughts scattering like startled birds. She was no closer to understanding the great mysteries than she'd been at 17. She was just older, more tired, with a bad back and worn hands. She felt tears begin to form and blinked them back. This was not new either. Every few months, this grief would surface. The grief of an ordinary life in a place dedicated to the extraordinary. The grief of being the monastery's forgotten worker, the one who made others' practice possible while having no practice of her own. She returned to sweeping, trying to push the thoughts away. But they persisted. You've wasted your life. The voice in her mind said, you ran from one prison into another. At least as a merchant's wife, you might have had children, a home, a purpose. Here you have nothing. You are nothing. A sweeper. A nobody. 32 years old and already used up. The tears came now despite her efforts. They fell onto the clean floor she was sweeping, making small dark spots on the wood. She swept over them, erasing them, but more tears fell. 15 years of holding this grief, and suddenly it would not be held anymore. Sunim set down her broom. She sank to her knees on the floor she'd just swept. And for the first time in 15 years, she allowed herself to truly cry. Not silent tears, but deep sobs that came from a place she'd tried to seal away. The grief of being ordinary. The grief of having no special talents. The grief of being the person even she herself had given up on. She cried until her body was empty, until the sobs became hiccups, then quiet breathing. She remained on her knees, feeling the cold of the floor seeping through her robes, feeling the ache in her back, feeling everything she usually tried not to feel. And in that emptiness, something shifted. The lamp flame flickered. Outside, a bird called the first bird of morning, announcing dawn, though the sky was still dark. Somewhere in the monastery, someone coughed. The meditation hall existed around her, patient and quiet, waiting for nothing. Sunim looked at the floor beneath her. The wood was old, worn smooth by decades of monks walking across it, sitting on it, prostrating on it. In the lamplight, she could see the grain of the wood, dark lines flowing through lighter wood like rivers seen from high above. She could see the places where her broom had passed, leaving faint marks in the direction of her sweeping. She could see the dark spots where her tears had fallen, already beginning to dry. This floor, this ordinary floor, how many times had she swept it without truly seeing it? How many thousands of times had she passed her broom over these boards, thinking about other things, wishing she were doing something else? Someone else? She placed her palm flat against the wood. It was cold, solid, real. It had been a tree once, she thought. A tree that grew in a forest, that knew sun and rain, that housed birds and insects. Someone had cut it down. Someone had shaped it into boards. Someone had carried those boards up this mountain. Someone had laid them here, board by board, creating this floor. And now monks sat on it, seeking enlightenment. And she swept it, every morning, for 15 years. How many times had her broom touched this floor? Millions of times. Surely, millions of moments of contact between bristles and wood. And every one of those moments was real. Every one of them had happened. They were not preparation for some future realization. They were not stepping stones to somewhere else. They were themselves. Complete. Whole. Sunim's hand was still on the floor. She could feel her own heartbeat through her palm. Or maybe she was feeling the floor's heartbeat, the slow, patient heartbeat of wood, of the tree it had been, of the earth that had grown that tree. Everything was connected. Her hand, the floor, the lamp, the darkness, the bird calling outside, the dust she'd swept into piles, the broom lying beside her. All of it arising together, none of it separate, none of it more important than any other part. And she was part of it, not separate, not the sweeper standing apart from what she swept. She was the sweeping itself, the movement, the contact, the attention. She had been practicing all along. Every morning, every sweep, she had been meeting the floor, moment after moment, in the only way she knew how. With her body, with her worn broom, with her aching back and calloused hands. There was no other enlightenment to seek. This was it. This floor, this dawn, this ache in her knees, this breath, this heartbeat. Nothing special, and therefore, everything. Sunim began to laugh. It started as a small sound, almost like another sob, but then it grew. She laughed at herself, at 15 years of thinking she was failing, at the idea that there was somewhere else to get to, something else to become. She laughed at the senior monks, pursuing enlightenment through fierce meditation, while she'd been meeting it every morning with her broom. She laughed at the absurdity of it all, that the thing she'd been looking for was the thing she'd been doing all along. The laughter subsided. She picked up her broom. The sky outside the windows was beginning to lighten true dawn, not just the promise of it. She had maybe 15 minutes before the wake-up bell would ring and monks would begin filing into this hall for morning meditation. She returned to her sweeping northeast corner, working methodically across the floor. But everything was different now. Or nothing was different, she couldn't quite tell which. The broom still whispered against the wood. Her back still ached. Her hands still gripped the worn handle. But now she felt the wood beneath the bristles. She felt the movement of her body, the weight shifting from foot to foot, the breath moving in and out. She was not the sweeper enduring an unwanted task. She was the sweeping itself. Just this. Just now. Swish, swish, swish. The dust gathered into lines. She swept it into a pile near the door, where she would collect it after finishing the floor. This dust, was it different from anything else? It had been part of leaves, part of earth, part of monks' robes, part of the air itself. Now it was gathered together briefly before she would scatter it back outside. Nothing created, nothing destroyed. Just transformation. Endless transformation. She reached the southwest corner. The last section. Soon she would be done. And tomorrow she would begin again. And the day after that. And the day after that. For how many more years? It didn't matter. Each morning was complete in itself. Each sweep of the broom was not a step towards something else. It was itself. Perfect. Whole. The wake-up bell rang. Sunim gathered her dust pile with the special brush she kept for this purpose, swept it into a wooden dustpan, and carried it outside. The sky was pink now, streaked with orange. The mountain air was cold and sharp. She scattered the dust near the vegetable garden, where it would feed the soil. Monks began emerging from their sleeping quarters, rubbing sleep from their eyes, pulling robes tighter against the cold. They filed toward the meditation hall. Sunim stood aside, pressing her back against the wall so they could pass. Most didn't acknowledge her. Some nodded briefly. One young monk smiled and said, "Thank you for sweeping, Sunim." "You're welcome," she said, and meant it. Completely. She returned to the maintenance closet where she kept her broom and dustpan. She placed them in their usual corner. In a few hours, after the morning meditation and breakfast, she would have other tasks. The kitchen needed sweeping. The entrance hall needed cleaning. The temple grounds needed raking. Ordinary work. Endless work. The work that made all the other work possible. But now, she had an hour before breakfast. She walked to her small room, sat on her meditation cushion, and settled into stillness. Her back ached. Her knees protested. Her mind began its usual dance of scattered thoughts. But she sat with it all, not trying to achieve anything, not trying to become anything, just sitting, just breathing. Ordinary mind meeting ordinary moment. Outside her window, the full light of day was arriving. Down in the valley, merchants would be opening their stalls. In one of those stalls, perhaps, a ceramic merchant was arranging his wares, never knowing that his daughter had found something he might not have a name for. Something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Something that had been waiting all along in the daily sweep of an old broom across a clean floor. Sometimes, the practice we think we're failing at is the only practice we need. Sunim believed for 15 years that she was doing maintenance work while real practice happened elsewhere. She swept the meditation hall while others meditated in it, never recognizing that her sweeping was itself a meditation, that her attention to the floor, moment after moment, morning after morning, was training her awareness more deeply than any forced sitting ever could. Consider your own life. What tasks do you do that feel like just getting through? What work seems like mere necessity? The things you do to maintain life while real living happens elsewhere. Making your bed, washing dishes, commuting to work, folding laundry, brushing your teeth. The countless ordinary actions that fill your days but somehow don't count as real life. That feel like the scaffolding around the building, not the building itself. But what if there is no building? What if it's all scaffolding? Or to say it differently, what if every moment is the building, and nothing is mere preparation for something else? What if washing dishes is not the thing you do so you can get to the real practice, but is itself the practice? What if the commute is not the gap between meaningful moments, but is itself fully meaningful, fully alive, fully real? This is what Zen masters mean when they speak of ordinary mind. They're pointing at the mind that washes dishes without adding a story about washing dishes. The mind that sweeps without comparing itself to others who meditate. The mind that meets each moment directly, without the commentary of this matters or this doesn't matter, this is spiritual or this is mundane. Sunim's breakthrough came when she stopped comparing her experience to an imagined ideal. For 15 years, she'd held in her mind an image of what a good monk should be, someone who could sit for hours in deep meditation, someone who had insights to share, someone whose practice looked impressive, important, spiritual, and measured against that image, she failed every day. She was just the sweeper, just the ordinary one, just the person doing necessary but unimportant work. But when she finally allowed herself to feel that grief completely, when she stopped running from the reality of her ordinary life, something opened. She saw the floor she'd been sweeping, really saw it, maybe for the first time. And in seeing it, she saw that she'd been meeting reality with complete attention all along. Her broom knew every inch of that floor. Her body knew the rhythm of the work. She had been present, faithful, attentive for 15 years. She had been practicing all along. She just hadn't recognized it as practice because it didn't match her image of what practice should look like. Think about the things in your life that you do with complete attention, even if you don't value them. Maybe you're careful when you cook, even though you tell yourself you're not a good cook. Maybe you notice everything when you walk your dog, even though you discount it as just routine exercise. Maybe you listen fully when a friend talks to you, even though you think you're bad at relationships. The attention is there. The practice is happening. But you don't count it because it doesn't match some image of what counts as spiritual practice, as personal growth, as real life. Your broom is touching the floor right now. In whatever you do, the quality of your attention, not the impressiveness of your accomplishments, not how your practice compares to others' practice, but simply the quality of your presence in this moment. That's what matters. That's what's real. And it's available in any activity, no matter how humble or ordinary it might seem. Sunim spent 15 years building a practice without knowing it. Every morning, she showed up. Every morning, she attended to her work. Every morning, she met the floor with her broom. And that consistency, that simple showing up day after day, that was the practice. The transformation happened not in spite of the ordinariness, but because of it. The ordinary work became the container for extraordinary presence. Feel your body now against the bed. Notice your breath moving in and out. This moment is not preparation for sleep. It's not the space between waking and sleeping. It is itself, complete, whole. Your attention to it, however scattered, however imperfect, is enough. You are enough. The ordinary mind you have right now, tired and wondering and maybe disappointed that you're not more spiritual or more accomplished or more something, that mind is the Buddha mind. That mind is ordinary mind. That mind is the one that knows how to sweep floors and wash dishes and breathe and be alive. Nothing special needs to happen. You don't need to achieve a particular state. You're not failing if your mind wanders or if you don't feel anything profound. Sunim's floor was already clean when she swept it each morning. She was making clean floor cleaner. And that's the practice. Meeting what's already here with fresh attention. Not making ordinary things extraordinary, but recognizing that ordinary things are already complete exactly as they are. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of the blanket. The practice is not elsewhere. The practice is this. Just this. Your breath. Your body. This moment. Nothing added. Nothing taken away. Ordinary mind. Buddha mind. Your mind. All the same. All along. Take one more breath. Feel it fill your lungs and then release. You don't have to understand this. You don't have to remember it. Just let it settle somewhere beneath thinking, where truth lives quietly, patiently, waiting for nothing. And as understanding dissolves into simple presence, another story finds us. This time, we travel to a garden where an old man discovers that mastery looks nothing like what he'd imagined. In the Vietnamese countryside, where rice paddies stretched toward distant mountains and morning mist made the world feel like a watercolor painting, there lived a man named Min. He was 68 years old. Though people said he looked older, his face deeply lined from a lifetime of sun, his hands gnarled like the roots of the trees he tended. For 50 years, Min had been the gardener at the Truc Lam monastery, the same monastery where a king had once abdicated his throne to become a monk, choosing meditation over empire. Min had not chosen this work. Like many things in his life, it had chosen him. He'd arrived at the monastery as a teenager during the war, fleeing a village that no longer existed. The abbot at that time, a gentle man with sad eyes, had given him shelter and eventually a role: tend the gardens, keep the grounds beautiful, make a place of peace in a world of chaos. And Min had done exactly that. For 50 years, through wars and peace, through seasons and decades, through the deaths of 4 abbots and the arrival of the 5th, he had planted trees that were now taller than the monastery's roof. He had cultivated flowers that bloomed in precise succession, so that from early spring to late autumn there was always color somewhere in the grounds. He had designed paths that led visitors through carefully orchestrated experiences of shade and light, intimacy and openness. The monks praised his work. Visitors from the city would arrive stressed and distracted, and after walking through Min's gardens, they would become quiet, peaceful, eye-centered. "Your gardens teach the Dharma," the current abbot had told him once. "They show impermanence and beauty and the way all things arise together." Min had accepted the compliment with a bow, but inside, a different truth lived. A truth he had never spoken to anyone, not in 50 years. The truth was this: Min hated the garden, not the plants themselves. He loved the frangipani trees with their cream-colored flowers. He loved the lotus pond where dragonflies danced in summer. He loved the moss that grew on the north side of stones, soft as velvet. What he hated was his relationship to the garden. The way he could never rest. The way he lay awake at night thinking about which branches needed pruning, which bed needed weeding, which stone in the path was settling unevenly. The way he could walk through beauty he himself had created and see only problems, only imperfections, only the gap between how things were and how they should be. This morning, Min woke before dawn as he always did. His body ached. It always ached now. His knees were bad. His lower back sent sharp pains down his left leg when he stood too quickly. His hands, those gnarled hands that had planted thousands of flowers, could barely open in the morning until he'd worked the stiffness out of them. He dressed slowly, pulling on the same worn clothes he'd worn for years. Cotton pants, a thin shirt, a conical hat to shade his face from the sun. He looked at himself briefly in the small mirror above his basin. An old man looked back. When had that happened? He still felt like the 18-year-old who'd arrived here, frightened and lost. But that boy was gone, buried under 50 years of work, of trying, of never quite getting it right. Outside, the garden waited. It always waited, patient and demanding at once. Min began his morning walk, the same walk he took every day, inspecting everything. The inspection was automatic now, built into his body after decades of repetition. His eyes moved constantly, scanning, assessing, finding problems. The hibiscus by the entrance gate, 3 flowers had dropped overnight. He made a mental note to sweep them before visitors arrived. The stone path near the meditation hall, moss was growing in the cracks, which was good, except it was growing unevenly, creating a patchy appearance. Should he encourage it or remove it? The bamboo grove, some stalks were yellowing at the tips. Disease, nutrient deficiency, he'd need to investigate. The lotus pond, the water level had dropped. He'd need to add more before the heat of the day. Problem after problem. Imperfection after imperfection. The garden that others saw as paradise was, to Ming, an endless list of things needing attention, requiring correction, demanding more. He reached the frangipani tree at the garden center, the oldest tree on the grounds. He'd planted it himself 45 years ago, a small sapling given to him by a visiting monk. Now, it towered overhead, its branches spreading wide, its bark thick and textured. In the dawn light, its cream-colored flowers seemed to glow. Min looked up at the tree and felt the familiar tightness in his chest. This tree was dying. He'd known it for 2 years now, but hadn't told anyone. A fungal infection in the roots, slowly spreading. He'd tried treatments. He'd consulted experts from the agricultural college in the city. Nothing worked. The tree would be dead within another year, maybe 2. And when it died, a piece of the garden's heart would die with it. He placed his hand on the trunk, feeling the rough bark against his palm. 50 years, he thought. 50 years of work. And what did he have to show for it? A garden that was never quite right. Trees that would die, flowers that would wilt, stones that would settle, paths that would erode. Everything he built, everything he maintained, was temporary. All of it was falling apart, even as he tried to hold it together. The grief rose up in him suddenly, unexpectedly. He'd managed to keep it at bay for so long. This grief, by staying busy, by focusing on the next task, the next problem. But standing here with his hand on the dying tree, watching dawn light slowly reveal the imperfect garden around him, he couldn't hold it back anymore. "I'm so tired," he said aloud to the tree. His voice sounded strange in the quiet garden. He rarely spoke when he was alone. I'm so tired of trying, of fixing, of never being done. I thought. He paused, surprised by what he was about to say. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I paid enough attention, I could make something perfect, something that would last. But it's all just falling apart. You're dying. The garden is dying. I'm dying. And all this work, what was it for? The tree didn't answer. Of course. A bird called from somewhere in its branches. A sound pure and simple, indifferent to Min's existential crisis. He pulled his hand back and sat down heavily on the stone bench near the tree's base. This bench was another of his creations, placed here 15 years ago, positioned just right to offer shade in summer and sun in winter. Even now, even in his grief, part of his mind was noting that the bench had settled slightly, tilting maybe half a degree to the left. Should he level it, add more gravel beneath the low corner, and there it was again. The pattern, the endless pattern. See the problem, fix the problem, find the next problem. For 50 years, for his entire adult life, he had been caught in this pattern like a fish in a net, swimming frantically but never getting free. Min closed his eyes. His body hurt. His heart hurt. The morning air was cool but would soon be hot. Another day stretched ahead of him. More problems to solve. More imperfections to correct. More proof that nothing he did would ever be enough. Min, he opened his eyes. Brother Than, the youngest monk in the monastery, was standing on the path, looking at him with concern. Than was 23, had been a monk for only 2 years. He had a bright, open face that reminded Min painfully of his own young face, back when he'd still believed the world made sense. "Are you well?" Than asked. "I saw you from the meditation hall window. You were just sitting here." "You never just sit." Min tried to smile, to wave away the concern. But what came out instead was the truth. "I'm tired. 10. So tired." Tan came closer and, without asking permission, sat down next to him on the tilted bench. They sat in silence for a moment. The bird in the frangipani tree called again. The first real light of day was touching the tops of the distant mountains. "The garden is beautiful this morning," Tan said softly. Min looked around, trying to see what Tan was seeing. But his eyes kept catching on problems. That uneven moss, those dropped hibiscus flowers, the low water in the pond, the dying tree above them. "Is it?" Min said, and couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "I only see what's wrong with it." "What's wrong with it?" Than sounded genuinely curious. "Everything," Ming said. He began to point. "The moss there is patchy. The water level is low. 3 flowers fell by the gate. The bamboo is yellowing. The path stones are settling. And this tree," he gestured upward, "this tree is dying. Root rot. Nothing I do helps." Than was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "May I tell you what I see, if you wish? I see moss finding the places it wants to grow. I see flowers that bloomed and now are returning to the earth. I see bamboo that will yellow and die back and send up new shoots in spring. I see a path that's been walked on for so many years that it's becoming part of the ground itself. And I see a tree that has given shade and flowers and beauty for decades and is now teaching its final teaching." Min felt something shift in his chest. "What teaching is that?" That everything dies, Than said simply. That nothing we love lasts forever. That trying to hold on to things is what hurts, not the losing itself. But I'm the gardener, Min said. My job is to maintain things, to keep the garden beautiful, to prevent decay. Is it? Than asked. Or is your job to tend things while they're here, to care for them without demanding they stay? Min looked at the young monk. How do you know these things? You're 23 years old. Than smiled. I know them because I watch you. You've taught me more about the Dharma than any sutra has. You show up every day. You pay attention to everything. You care so deeply. But there's one thing the abbot teaches that I think you haven't learned yet. What's that? The difference between caring and controlling. The words landed in Min like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything he thought he knew. I care for the garden, he said, but even as he spoke, he heard the uncertainty in his voice. You do, Than agreed. But you also try to control it. Try to make it match some perfect image in your mind. And when it doesn't match, when flowers fall or water levels drop or trees get sick, you suffer. Not because the garden is suffering, but because reality won't conform to your plan. Min felt exposed, seen in a way that was uncomfortable and also, somehow, a relief. To be known. To have someone understand the exhausting pattern he'd been caught in for so long. I thought that was my job, he said quietly. To make things perfect. Nothing is perfect, Tang said. But everything is complete. That moss is growing exactly as moss grows. Those flowers fell exactly when they were ready to fall. This tree is dying exactly as trees die. It's all perfect in its imperfection. It's all complete just as it is. They sat together as the light grew stronger. Min felt something beginning to unwind in him, some tight coil that had been wound tighter and tighter for 50 years. The pattern was becoming visible to him now, not just in the garden, but in his whole life. The constant scanning for problems, the endless fixing, the way he could never rest, never arrive, because there was always something that needed to be different, better, more. He thought about his morning walk, the inspection he did every day. What if he walked through the garden not looking for problems but simply seeing what was there? What if he tended the plants not to make them conform to his vision but to support them in being what they already were? What if the garden didn't need to be perfect to be enough? The abbot asked me to find you, Tang said, standing up. He wants to talk to you about something. But there's no hurry. I'll tell him you'll come when you're ready. Than walked away, his brown robes disappearing around the curve of the path. Min remained on the tilted bench, his hand resting on the rough bark of the dying tree. A wind moved through the garden, and the frangipani flowers released their scent, sweet and heavy, the smell of his whole life here. How many times had he smelled this fragrance? Thousands of times. Tens of thousands. Had he ever really breathed it in before? Or had he always been too busy planning, fixing, worrying about the next thing? He breathed it in now, completely. The sweetness of it, almost overwhelming. And he noticed something he'd never noticed before. The scent was slightly different depending on where you were under the tree. Nearer the trunk, it was sweeter, more concentrated. Further out, under the outer branches, it was lighter, mixed with other scents, earth, leaves, the distant smell of incense from the meditation hall. The tree created not one experience, but many experiences, depending on where you stood, when you breathed, how the wind was moving. Min stood up slowly, feeling his bad knees protest. He walked a few steps away from the tree, then back toward it, then to the side. Each position offered something different. Each was complete in itself. There was no perfect place to stand. Every place was the perfect place, offering exactly what it offered. He walked through the garden now, but differently than before. He wasn't inspecting. He was meeting the moss exactly as it grew, meeting the fallen flowers exactly as they lay, meeting the yellowing bamboo exactly as it yellowed, meeting the low water exactly at its level. Nothing needed to be fixed. Everything was already expressing its nature completely. This didn't mean he would stop tending the garden. He would still sweep the fallen flowers, but because sweeping them was part of the garden's cycle, not because their falling was a problem. He would still add water to the pond, but because water naturally evaporates and rain naturally replenishes, and he was part of that natural cycle. He would still prune and weed and plant, but not from a place of trying to force the garden to match his vision, from a place of collaboration with what was already happening. The pattern he'd been caught in the endless cycle of finding and fixing, he could see it clearly now. It wasn't the garden that needed to change. It was his relationship to the garden. He had been fighting reality for 50 years, trying to impose perfection on a world that was already complete in its imperfection. When he reached the abbot's chambers, he found the old monk sitting in his usual spot, looking out at the mountains. "Ah, Ming," the abbot said without turning around. "Brother Than said you were having a difficult morning." "I was," Ming said. "I am. I've been having a difficult 50 years. Actually," the abbot turned to him then, and something in his eyes suggested this was not news. "Sit, please." Min sat on the cushion across from the abbot. "I wanted to talk to you about the frangipani tree," the abbot said. Min's heart sank. "You know it's dying." "Of course I know. Everyone knows except the visitors. You've done everything you could to save it." "It wasn't enough." "No," the abbot agreed. "It wasn't. Trees die. That's what trees do. Just as they grow, they die. Both are equally natural. But I failed. You cared for it beautifully for 45 years. You gave it every advantage. It thrived because of your attention. And now it's dying not because you failed, but because that's what happens. Death is not failure. Death is completion." Min felt the tears come then. Not the grief of this morning, but something cleaner, simpler. Relief, maybe. To be released from the burden of making things last forever. "I wanted to tell you," the abbot continued, "that when the tree dies, we're not going to plant another frangipani in its place. We're going to leave the space open. Let whatever wants to grow there grow there. Maybe grass. Maybe wildflowers. Maybe another tree will seed itself. We'll see. The garden will decide. But the design Min started. The design is perfect exactly as it changes," the abbot said. "You taught me that. All these years, watching you work, I learned that the most beautiful gardens are the ones where the gardener and the garden work together, where the gardener's vision and nature's will meet and create something neither could make alone. You've been doing that all along, Ming. You've just been suffering because you thought you were supposed to be in complete control." Min sat with this. Outside the window, he could see a corner of the garden. The morning light was fully arrived now, touching everything with gold. From this angle, he couldn't see any of the problems he'd noted earlier. He could only see beauty. Light on leaves, shadows under stones. the way the path curved out of sight, the mystery of what came next. "I've been caught in a pattern," Min said slowly. "Seeing problems, fixing them, finding new problems. Over and over. Never able to rest. Never able to just be with what is." "Yes," the abbot said. "That's the human pattern. We do it with gardens, with our bodies, with our minds, with our lives. We're always trying to fix what we think is broken. But what if nothing is broken? What if everything is just being what it is? And our job is to meet it with attention and care, not control." They sat in silence. A bird called. The same bird, perhaps, that had called from the frangipani tree. Its song was perfect. Not because it was beautiful though it was, but because it was exactly what it was. The bird wasn't trying to sing better. It was just singing. "I'm 68 years old," Min said. "I've been doing this wrong for 50 years. Or you've been doing it perfectly wrong," the abbot said with a small smile. "And now you get to do it differently." How many people learn this truth? How many get to spend even one day seeing clearly? You have however many days you have left. That's a gift. Min bowed. When he raised his head, he said, "I should go. The garden needs tending." "Does it?" the abbot asked. Min paused at the door. "The garden is being exactly what it is. And I am the gardener. So I'll go tend it. Not because it needs fixing, but because tending is what I do. It's who I am." "Ah," the abbot said. "Now you understand. The pattern of control disguises itself as care. We tell ourselves we're being responsible, attentive, loving. We're just trying to make things right. But underneath, there's a relentless quality to it. A dissatisfaction. A sense that things aren't quite as they should be. And if we could just fix this one thing, adjust that one thing, improve this other thing, then finally we could rest. Finally, things would be okay. But they're already okay. Right now. Exactly as they are. The imperfections aren't defects. They're features. They're how things actually are, as opposed to how we think they should be." Min saw his garden as a collection of problems needing solutions. Brother Thun saw the same garden as life expressing itself. Same flowers, same moss, same dying tree, but completely different relationships to what was there. Min was exhausted from fighting reality. Thun was at peace with it. Think about the ways you scan your own life for problems. The mental walkthrough you do, maybe first thing in the morning or last thing at night. Checking your body, what hurts, what's not quite right, what needs to be fixed. Checking your relationships, who's upset with you, what did you say wrong, what do you need to repair. Checking your work, what's behind schedule, what's not perfect. What will people judge? This scanning feels responsible. It feels like you're being mature, taking care of things. But notice what it does to your nervous system. Notice how it prevents you from ever arriving. You can't rest because there's always something that needs attention. Always something not quite right. Always another problem waiting to be solved. What if you walked through your life the way Brother Thun walked through the garden? Seeing what's there without the overlay of this is a problem. Your body aches, yes. Bodies do that. A relationship is strained, yes. Relationships go through seasons. Work is challenging, yes. Work challenges us. None of these facts require you to be at war with them. They're just what's happening right now. Caring for something doesn't mean controlling it. Men learned this after 50 years. You can tend a garden without demanding it match your perfect vision. You can care for your body without needing it to be different than it is. You can love people without requiring them to change. You can do your work without driving yourself into exhaustion trying to make it perfect. The pattern of control promises that if you just try hard enough, you can make everything right. But this is a lie. You can't make everything right because right is a concept in your mind, not a state of reality. Reality is just what it is. And your relationship to it can be one of constant combat, always trying to fix, improve, perfect, or it can be one of attention and care and allowing. Min will still tend his garden. He'll still sweep fallen flowers and add water and prune branches, but he'll do it from a different place. Not from anxiety about what's wrong, but from participation in what's already happening. He's part of the garden's unfolding. He doesn't have to control it. He just has to show up and do his part, and let the garden do its part, and trust that what emerges from that collaboration is exactly what needs to emerge. Let your body settle deeper into the bed. Feel your breath moving without your help. Your lungs know how to breathe. Your heart knows how to beat. Your body is tending itself right now, moment by moment, without needing your control. Can you let it? Can you trust it, just for now, just for these hours of rest? Can you step out of the pattern of scanning for problems and simply be with what is? The garden tends itself. Mostly. Min's work is important, but the garden would grow even without him. It would be different, but not wrong, just different. Your life tends itself too. You matter. Your choices matter. Your care matters. But you don't have to control everything. You can release your grip, just a little. You can let reality be what it is. You can meet it with attention instead of combat. You can rest, breathe in, breathe out. Nothing needs to change. Nothing needs to be fixed. Not right now. Not in this moment. The pattern can loosen. The grip can soften. And as it does, another story finds its way to us, gentle as moss growing on stone. In medieval China, during the Song dynasty, when the capital at Kaifeng bustled with merchants and scholars, and the Grand Canal brought goods from across the empire, there lived a young man named Wei. He was 26 years old, the slight of build, with the hunched shoulders of someone who spent most of his time bent over books. For as long as he could remember, Wei had been preparing for the imperial examinations, those grueling tests that could transform a commoner into a government official, could elevate an entire family, could make meaning of a life. Wei's father had been a minor clerk, his grandfather a farmer. But Wei had shown early promise with characters and poetry, and his parents had sacrificed everything to give him an education. They'd sold their best field to pay for tutors. His mother had sewn clothes for neighbors late into the night to afford books. His younger sister had forgone marriage, so her dowry money could fund Wei's studies. The family's entire fortune, its entire hope, rested on Wei's narrow shoulders. And Wei had not disappointed them. He'd passed the preliminary examinations at age 18. He'd passed the provincial examinations at 22. Now he was preparing for the palace examination, the final test, the one administered by the emperor himself. If he passed, he would become a jinshi, a presented scholar. He would receive an official position. His family would be elevated. Everything they'd sacrificed would be vindicated. But lately, something had begun to trouble Wei. A question had lodged itself in his mind like a stone in his shoe. Uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. The question was this: what if I pass? And it's still not enough? He tried to push the question away. It felt like betrayal to even think it. His family had given up everything. They believed in him completely. His mother would light incense each morning and pray to the ancestors for his success. His father would tell anyone who would listen about his brilliant son. His sister wrote him letters full of encouragement and pride. How could he doubt? How could he question whether success would bring the fulfillment everyone promised it would? This morning, Wei sat in his small rented room in Kaifeng, surrounded by books. He'd been studying since before dawn the 4 books and 5 classics, histories of the dynasties, 8-legged essay composition, poetry in the regulated verse style. His hand cramped from writing practice essays. His eyes ached from reading by candlelight. His back hurt from sitting hunched over his desk for hours. In 3 days, he would take the palace examination. In 3 days, his entire life would be decided. Pass, and he would be someone. Fail, and he would be no one. All the years of study, all the sacrifice, all the hope, it would all come down to one day. One test. One performance before imperial examiners. Wei looked at the essay he'd been writing. The prompt was about benevolent governance. He'd crafted careful arguments, cited appropriate classical sources, demonstrated his mastery of literary style. It was a good essay. His tutor would have been pleased with it. But as Wei read over his own words, he felt nothing. They were correct, but empty. Like a beautiful house with no one living in it. He set down his brush. Outside his window, the city was coming alive. Vendors calling out their wares. Children laughing. Horses' hooves on cobblestones. The sound of 1,000 ordinary lives being lived by people who would never take the palace examination, who would never become officials, who were somehow managing to exist without the validation Wei was so desperately seeking. The stone in the shoe question returned, more insistent now. What if I pass? And it's still not enough? Wei stood abruptly. He needed air. He needed to move. The walls of his small room suddenly felt suffocating. He left his lodging and walked into the streets of Kaifeng. The morning market was in full swing. Fishmongers displayed their catch on beds of ice. A baker pulled loaves from a clay oven. The smell of fresh bread making Wei's stomach clench. He'd forgotten to eat breakfast again. An old woman sold oranges from a cart, calling out their sweetness. A musician sat at a corner, playing a bamboo flute, his instrument case open for coins. Wei walked past all of them, barely seeing them. His mind was still in his room, still circling the same anxious thoughts. 3 days. Just 3 days until everything was decided. Would he remember all the necessary quotes? Would his calligraphy be steady despite his nervousness? Would the examiners see his worth? Or would they find him lacking? He found himself at the edge of the West Lake, that famous body of water that poets had praised for centuries. Willows hung over the water, their reflection creating a mirror image that blurred the boundary between sky and lake. Small boats drifted, fishermen casting their nets. On the far shore, a Buddhist temple rose, its curved roof tiles gleaming in the morning sun. Wei had often come to this lake to study. He would find a quiet spot and read aloud, memorizing passages while the water lapped at the shore. But today he couldn't think about studying. The question was too loud now. What if I pass? And it's still not enough? You look troubled. Young scholar. Wei turned. An old monk stood beside him, though Wei hadn't heard him approach. The monk was very old, his face a map of wrinkles, his few remaining teeth yellow. He wore simple grey robes and leaned on a wooden walking stick, but his eyes were bright, alert, present. "I'm fine," Wei said automatically. "Just thinking." "Heavy thinking," the monk observed, "the kind that makes the shoulders tight and the jaw clench." "I recognize it. I used to think that way myself, before I learned better." Wei felt a flash of irritation. He didn't have time for this. He had 3 days left to prepare, and here was some old monk who wanted to chat. But something in the monk's weathered face, some quality of attention, made him pause. "I have an examination in 3 days," Wei said. "The palace examination. Everything depends on it." "Ah," the monk said. "Everything. That is a heavy burden for one examination to carry. My family has sacrificed everything for my education. If I fail," Wei couldn't finish the sentence. "If you fail, you will have disappointed them, lost their investment, proven their sacrifice was for nothing." "Yes," Wei said, miserably. "And if you pass?" The question caught Wei off guard. "If I pass, then I'll be successful. I'll have an official position. My family will be proud. Everything will have been worth it." "Will it?" the monk asked gently. And there it was again. The question beneath the question. The stone in the shoe. "I don't know," Wei admitted, and saying it aloud felt like stepping off a cliff. "I thought I knew. I've been working toward this for so long, but lately I keep wondering, what if I achieve everything I'm supposed to achieve, and I still feel empty? What if success doesn't bring what I think it will?" The monk nodded slowly, as if this was the most sensible thing he'd heard all day. "Walk with me," he said. They walked along the edge of the lake. The monk moved slowly, his stick clicking against the stone path, but he moved with an unhurried quality that somehow wasn't slow. Just present. Just walking. "Tell me," the monk said after a while, "when did you first begin studying for the examinations?" "When I was 7 years old." "And why did you begin?" Wei thought back. It was hard to remember now. "My tutor said I had a good mind. My parents were so happy. They said I could be someone important, that I could bring honor to the family. So you studied to make them happy, to become important, to bring honor." "Yes. And in these 19 years, have you been happy?" The question struck Wei like a physical blow. Had he been happy? He tried to remember. Long nights of studying, the anxiety before examinations, the relief of passing, which lasted perhaps a day, before anxiety about the next test began. The constant sense of not knowing enough, not being good enough, not having done enough. The way he compared himself to other students, always measuring, always coming up short somewhere. The exhaustion, the isolation, the way his life had narrowed to books and tests and proving himself worthy. "No," Wei said quietly. "I haven't been happy. But I told myself I would be happy later. After I passed the next examination, after I achieved the next goal, happiness was always waiting just beyond the next hurdle. And you are still telling yourself this," the monk said. It wasn't a question. Wei felt his throat tighten. "I don't know how else to be. This is what I've been doing my whole life. Working towards something. Trying to become worthy. If I stop, if I question it, then what was it all for? What have I been doing with my life?" They had reached a small pavilion overlooking the water. The monk sat on a stone bench, patting the space beside him. Vaisat. I will tell you something, the monk said, but you must promise to really hear it, not just listen to the words while your mind argues with them. I'll try. You are already worthy. Wei opened his mouth to protest. He hadn't passed the examination yet, hadn't proven anything yet, but the monk held up a hand. Not worthy because of what you've achieved. Not worthy because of what you will achieve. Worthy simply because you exist. Because you are alive. Because you are here, now, breathing this air, seeing this water, being a conscious being in this conscious universe. That worthiness is not something you earn. It's what you are. It was true when you were 7 years old, before any studying. It's true now. It will be true whether you pass this examination or fail it. But if I fail, I'll have wasted my family's sacrifice. Your family's sacrifice was their choice. It came from love, yes. But you don't owe them your happiness. You don't owe them your entire life spent proving you were worth the investment. They gave because they loved you. The moment you turn that gift into a debt, you poison it. Wei felt something cracking open in his chest. I've spent 19 years trying to become worthy. And you've suffered for 19 years because you were chasing something you already had. You were trying to prove something that didn't need proving. And even if you pass this examination, even if you become the most successful official in the empire, that emptiness you fear, it will still be there. Because the emptiness isn't from lacking achievement. It's from lacking connection to your own inherent worth. It's from making your existence conditional on performance. The monk picked up a small stone from the path and tossed it into the lake. Ripples spread outward, circles within circles, each one perfect and temporary. See that? The monk said. That stone created those ripples. But the water was already worthy of being water before the stone entered it. The stone didn't make the water water. It just disturbed the surface. Your achievements are like that stone. They create ripples. They change the surface pattern. But they don't create your fundamental nature. They don't make you worthy. They just disturb what was already complete. Wei watched the ripples fade. The water became still again. Clouds reflected in it. The willow trees. The sky. All of it mirrored perfectly on the surface. I have this pattern, Wei said slowly. I achieve something, and for a moment I feel relief. But then the anxiety comes back. There's another test, another goal, another thing I need to prove. It never ends. The worthiness I'm trying to achieve is always just out of reach. Because you're looking for it outside yourself, the monk said. You're trying to get other people, your family, the examiners, society to tell you that you're worthy. But their approval is just more ripples on the surface. It comes and goes. It changes with circumstances. Real worth, the kind that doesn't waver, the kind that can't be taken away, that's not something anyone can give you. It's something you recognize in yourself. How? Wei asked. How do I recognize it? The monk smiled. You're breathing right now. Yes? Yes. Did you earn the right to breathe? Did you pass an examination to prove you were worthy of oxygen? No, of course not. And yet you breathe. Your heart beats. Your body digests food. Your eyes see. Your ears hear. All of this happens without you having to prove you deserve it. Life itself says you're worthy. Existence itself says you belong here. Everything else, the achievements, the titles, the approval that's extra, That's just decoration on top of the fundamental fact that you are alive. And that's enough. They sat in silence. A breeze moved across the water. Somewhere, a bell rang from the temple across the lake. The sound hung in the air and then faded. Wei felt something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't happiness. Exactly. It was more like space. Like a clenched fist slowly opening. He'd been holding on so tightly for so long to his goals, to his family's expectations, to the belief that he had to earn his right to exist. And just for this moment, he let his grip loosen slightly. What if I still take the examination? He asked. What if I still want to pass? Then take it, the monk said. Want to pass? Try your best. But do it from a different place. Not from, I must pass to be worthy. From, I am worthy, and this is something I'm choosing to do. The effort might look the same from the outside, but inside, everything is different. Inside, you're not desperate. You're not proving anything. You're just living your life, doing something you've been trained to do. And whatever happens, you're still yourself, still worthy, still whole. Wei thought about this, about sitting for the examination, not as a desperate, drowning person grasping for rescue, but as someone who was already standing on solid ground, just participating in something. The examination would still be challenging. He would still try his best, but maybe he wouldn't be carrying all that extra weight. The weight of needing it to validate his entire existence. I feel like I've been running for 19 years, Wei said, and I'm just now realizing I don't know what I was running from, or what I was running toward. You were running from the fear that you weren't enough, the monk said, and you were running toward a mirage, a future point where you would finally be enough. But here's the secret. You were always enough. Every single moment of those 19 years, even when you were suffering, even when you felt inadequate, you were enough. You were just caught in a pattern of believing you weren't. The monk stood slowly, leaning on his stick. I should return to the temple. But I'll leave you with this, whatever happens in 3 days. You'll still be you. You'll still have the same consciousness looking out of your eyes. You'll still need to eat and sleep and breathe. You'll still be alive in this mysterious universe. Pass or fail, that doesn't change. And that you're simple being here, that's the real accomplishment. Everything else is just what you do while you're here. He started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Wei? You might find that when you stop trying so hard to prove yourself worthy, you actually perform better. The desperation creates tension. The tension creates mistakes. When you know you're already whole, you can just do the work. Not desperately, just clearly. He walked away, his stick tapping against the stones, leaving Wei alone by the water. Wei sat for a long time. The sun climbed higher. The shadows shortened. Boats moved across the water. Life continued, indifferent to his existential crisis, which was somehow comforting. He thought about his family. Their sacrifice was real. Their love was real. But the monk was right. He'd turned their gift into a debt, their love into pressure. What if he could receive their sacrifice as what it was, love, without making it a burden he had to repay through achievement? What if he could honor their gift by living fully, by being present, by recognizing his own worth, rather than by spending his whole life trying to earn what they'd already freely given? He thought about the examination. 3 days away. He would still prepare, He would still do his best. But maybe he could approach it differently, not as the test that would determine if he deserved to exist, just as a test. One event in a long life. One ripple on the surface of the water. Standing up, Wei started walking back toward his lodging. But his body felt different. Lighter. The tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. His jaw was unclenched. He noticed things he usually rushed past: the orange vendor, arranging her fruit in perfect pyramids. The musician playing his flute with his eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music. A cat sleeping in a patch of sunlight, its body relaxed in complete trust that the world would continue to be what it was. When Wei reached his room, he looked at his essay again. The one about benevolent governance. It was technically correct, but it was also lifeless. He picked up his brush and began again. This time, he didn't write to impress examiners. He wrote because he actually had something to say about governance, about what makes a society flourish, about how people, including himself, needed to be seen as worthy before they could truly thrive. The words flowed differently now. Not perfectly, but more honestly. He didn't know if the examiners would prefer this version. He didn't know if this approach would help him pass. But for the first time in 19 years, he was writing from a place of something other than fear. When he finished, he set down his brush and looked out the window. The afternoon light was golden. Tomorrow he would study more. In 3 days, he would take the examination. He would do his best. And then, life would continue. He would still be himself, still breathing, still worthy, still here. The pattern of conditional worth runs deep in human life. From childhood, many of us learn that love and acceptance are tied to performance. We're praised when we succeed and corrected when we fail. Over time, this creates a belief so fundamental we don't even question it. I am worthy when I achieve. I am lovable when I perform well. I am acceptable when I meet expectations. And so we spend our lives trying to earn what we already have. We work to prove ourselves worthy to ourselves, to others, to some imagined judge. We tell ourselves, after I accomplish this thing, then I'll be able to rest. Then I'll be enough. But the goalpost keeps moving. There's always another achievement, another standard, another test. The moment of worthiness we're working toward never quite arrives. Wei recognized this pattern after 19 years. Some people never recognize it. They spend entire lives achieving, accumulating, proving, and never stop to question whether they're chasing something real or chasing a mirage. They die successful and empty, having gained the whole world while losing touch with themselves. Consider your own life. What are you trying to prove? Maybe it's not about academic achievement. Maybe it's about being a good parent, a successful professional, an attractive person, a spiritual person. Maybe you're trying to prove you're productive enough, disciplined enough, kind enough, strong enough, healed enough. The specifics vary, but the pattern is the same. I'm not enough yet, but I will be if I just do or achieve or become this thing. And beneath that pattern is exhaustion, because you can never rest. You can never arrive. You're always working, always proving, always measuring yourself against some standard. There's no peace in this way of being, just temporary relief when you hit a goal, followed quickly by the anxiety of the next goal. The monk told Wei something radical. You're already worthy. Not because of what you've done or what you'll do, because of what you are. Because you're alive. because you're conscious, because you're here. That worthiness isn't conditional. It's not earned through achievement or lost through failure. It's fundamental. It's what you are beneath all the doing and proving and achieving. This doesn't mean effort doesn't matter. Wei will still take his examination, but he'll take it from a different place. Not from desperate need to prove himself, from solid ground, from already existing worth. And paradoxically, as the monk suggested, he'll probably perform better. Because he's not carrying all that extra weight, not fighting for his existence with every answer, just taking a test, doing his best, allowing whatever happens to happen. You might notice resistance to this idea. Part of your mind might be arguing, but if I'm already worthy, why would I try? Why would I work hard? Won't I become lazy, unmotivated? But this is the voice of the pattern itself. The voice that's afraid that without the stick of conditional worth, you'll fall apart. The truth is exactly opposite. When you know you're fundamentally okay, you can work from freedom instead of fear. You can try things because they interest you, not because your worth depends on succeeding. You can rest when you need rest, because rest doesn't equal failure. You can be yourself without constantly performing worthiness. Let your body sink deeper into rest. Feel your breath moving, your heart beating, your body living. This is happening without any achievement required. Life doesn't ask you to prove yourself worthy. It just gives itself to you, freely, constantly. The only question is whether you can receive that gift, whether you can recognize that you're already whole, already enough, already here. Not someday when you've accomplished enough, not after you've healed enough, or grown enough, or changed enough. Right now, exactly as you are, breathing, being, alive. That's the worthiness that was never in question. Everything else is just ripples on the water. Feel the pillow beneath your head, the blanket's weight. Notice how you don't have to earn the right to rest. Rest is just here, available, whenever you stop fighting long enough to receive it. And as worthiness settles into your bones like truth, we move to another corner of the world, another life, another teaching waiting in the ordinary. In a small village in Japan, nestled between mountains where spring brought cherry blossoms and autumn turned the maples to fire, there lived a potter named Kenji. He was 47 years old, though his hands looked older, scarred from decades of working with clay and fire, the fingernails permanently stained with iron oxide, the knuckles thick from arthritis that was beginning to make even simple grips painful. Kenji had learned pottery from his father, who had learned from his father, going back 7 generations. The family kiln sat behind their house, a traditional wood-fired noborigama built into the hillside. Its multiple chambers designed to create the temperature variations that gave their pottery its distinctive character. For 40 years, Kenji had worked at this kiln, creating the simple tea bowls and sake cups and serving dishes that the family was known for. Nothing fancy, nothing that would end up in museums or collectors' homes. Just honest pottery for everyday use. But Kenji had a secret dream. A dream he'd carried since he was 7 years old, watching his father work. Someday, he would create a perfect tea bowl. Not just a good bowl, not just a functional bowl, a perfect bowl. The kind that tea masters would recognize immediately. The kind that would make people stop breathing for a moment when they first saw it. The kind that captured something essential about beauty and transience, and the way glaze and clay and fire could conspire to create something that transcended utility and became art. He'd been working toward this dream for 40 years. Every firing, he would make one special bowl. He would take extra care with the clay preparation, wedging it longer to remove all air bubbles. He would throw the bowl at exactly the right speed, with exactly the right water, feeling for that perfect thickness, thin enough to be elegant, thick enough to hold heat. He would trim it with precision, apply glaze with careful attention to thickness and coverage, place it in the best spot in the kiln, where he knew the ash would fall just right, where the temperature would be ideal. And every firing, the bowl would emerge imperfect. Sometimes, obviously flawed, a crack, a glaze defect, a warped form. Sometimes the flaws were subtle, the weight slightly off, the glaze color not quite right, the proportions almost, but not quite ideal. He had a shelf in his workshop where he kept these failures. 40 years of almost perfect bowls. Hundreds of them. Each one a disappointment. Each one proof that he hadn't yet achieved what he was reaching for. This morning, Kenji stood in his workshop, preparing for another firing. The kiln was loaded, ready to be lit. Tomorrow morning, he would begin the 3-day process of stoking the fire, slowly raising the temperature, reading the flames, making the 1,000 small decisions that determined how the pottery would emerge. And among the functional pieces, the rice bowls and sake cups that paid the bills, was one special tea bowl. Bowl number 417. Not that he was counting. He picked it up now, feeling its weight in his hands. It was beautiful. Even he could admit that. The form was elegant. The clay was perfectly prepared. He'd glazed it with his special Shino glaze, the one with the recipe his great-grandfather had developed. In the right light, you could see the subtle variations in thickness that would create landscape-like patterns after firing. This bowl had a chance. Maybe this would be the one. But as he held it, Kenji felt the familiar tightness in his chest. The same tightness he felt before every firing. The fear of disappointment. The exhaustion of trying again. The weight of 40 years of almost but not quite. His hands hurt. The arthritis was getting worse. Some mornings he could barely open his hands until he'd soaked them in warm water. How many more years could he do this work? How many more chances would he have to create the perfect bowl? Father? Kenji turned. His daughter Yuki stood in the workshop doorway. She was 23, recently graduated from art school in Tokyo, where she'd studied ceramics. She'd come home 2 months ago, ostensibly to help with a large order, but Kenji suspected she'd come home because she'd heard his hands were getting worse. Because she was worried about him. Because she was a good daughter, even though he'd never been very good at telling her so. "The kiln is ready?" she asked. "Yes. I'll light it tomorrow morning." She came closer, looking at the bowl in his hands. "That's beautiful. Is this the special one for this firing?" "Yes. I hope it comes out perfectly." Kenji set the bowl down carefully. "They never do." "Father, 416 times." "Yuki, 416 bowls. None of them perfect. None of them what I'm trying to create." He heard the bitterness in his own voice and hated it, but couldn't seem to stop. 40 years, and I'm no closer to succeeding than I was when I started. Yuki was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "May I tell you something? Something I learned in school?" "What?" "My professor, Tanaka-sensei, you know of him. The one who has work in the National Museum. He told us a story about his own teacher. His teacher had spent his whole life trying to recreate a famous tea bowl from the 16th century. Every firing, he would make his attempt. Every firing, he would fail. He did this for 60 years. And then, at the end of his life, his students asked him if he regretted spending so much time chasing something he never caught. Do you know what he said? Kenji shook his head. He said, "I never caught it because I was looking in the wrong direction. I thought perfection was ahead of me, something to achieve, but it was beneath my hands all along. Every bowl I made was already perfect. I just couldn't see it." Kenji felt something twist in his chest. That's easy to say at the end of a life, when it's too late to do anything differently. Is it? Yuki picked up one of the bowls from his failure shelf, one he'd made maybe 15 years ago. He remembered it. The glaze had run too much, pooling thickly at the bottom, creating an uneven surface. This bowl, why is it on the failure shelf? The glaze ran. Look at it. It's not balanced. But look at the color. Look at how the iron in the clay bled through the glaze here, creating these warm spots. Look at how the thick glaze at the bottom makes the bowl feel grounded, solid. Father, this bowl is beautiful. It's not what I was trying to create. I know. But it's what you did create. And it's wonderful exactly as it is. She set the bowl down and picked up another. This one, the form is too heavy. I was trying for delicacy, but my hands were tired. It's clumsy. It's substantial. It has weight. It would hold heat well for tea. Someone with cold hands in winter would love this bowl. She picked up another. This one? A crack appeared during firing. See? Along the side. It's ruined. It's a hairline crack. It's stable. And look, it creates this beautiful line across the landscape pattern in the glaze. It's like a river flowing through mountains. Father, someone would pay good money for this bowl. Someone would treasure it. But you call it a failure. Kenji felt his throat tighten. They're all failures because they're not what I was reaching for. I had a vision, an image in my mind of what the perfect bowl would be. And none of these are that bowl. No, Yuki agreed. They're not. They're something else. They're themselves. Each one unique. Each one a conversation between your hands and clay and fire and chance. Each one perfect in its own way, even if it's not the perfection you imagined. You don't understand, Kenji said, and his voice came out harsher than he intended. I've spent my whole life trying to achieve one thing. One thing, and I've failed. 416 times. Yuki set down the bowl she was holding and looked at her father directly. Then maybe it's time to let it go. The words hung in the air between them. Let it go. The dream he'd carried for 40 years. The vision that had driven him through countless firings. The standard against which he'd measured every bowl and found them all wanting. Let it go. I can't, Kenji said. It's all I've been working toward. If I let it go, what was the point? What have I been doing all these years? You've been making beautiful pottery, Yuki said gently. You've been creating objects that people use every day. Objects that hold their tea, for their sake, their rice. Objects that sit on their tables and in their hands and become part of their lives. You've been doing honest work with your hands. You've been keeping alive a tradition 7 generations old. Father, that's not nothing. That's everything. Kenji looked at the shelf of failures. Hundreds of bowls. And suddenly he saw them differently. Not as evidence of his inadequacy, but as evidence of 40 years of showing up. 40 years of trying. 40 years of working with clay and fire, engaging with the mystery of transformation, putting his hands to work, creating something from nothing. Each bowl was different. Each one had its own character. This one heavy, that one light. This one with dramatic iron spots, that one subtle and quiet. This one with a bold crack, that one with a perfect simple form. They were like children, he thought, each one themselves, each one expressing something he hadn't fully intended but had participated in creating. I don't know how to let it go, he said quietly. Then maybe start smaller, Yuki suggested. Don't let go of the dream entirely. Just let go of it for this firing. Just this once. Don't make a special bowl. Don't try for perfection. Just make what wants to be made. I already made the bowl. It's ready to go in the kiln. So don't make it special. Just let it be another bowl. One bowl among many. Not the one that has to be perfect. Just one bowl. Kenji looked at bowl 417 sitting on the table. It was beautiful. He'd put such care into it. But he'd put that care into it while carrying the heavy weight of needing it to be perfect. Needing it to validate 40 years of work. Needing it to prove he hadn't wasted his life chasing an impossible dream. What if he just let it be a bowl? Not the bowl. Not the perfect bowl. Just a bowl he'd made, with care, with skill, with attention, but without the crushing weight of needing it to be what it could never be. He picked up the bowl again, held it in his aching hands, and he tried something he'd never tried before. He tried seeing it not as a failure in waiting, not as a maybe success, but just as itself, a bowl, clay and glaze, shaped by his hands, ready to be transformed by fire. Whatever it became, it would be what it was. Not perfect, not imperfect, just itself. Okay, he said, just for this firing, I'll let it be just another bowl. The next morning, Kenji lit the kiln. The first stage of firing was always slow, gently warming the pottery, allowing any remaining moisture to escape without causing cracks. He fed small pieces of wood into the firebox, watching the smoke, reading the kiln's mood. Yuki helped him, as she had been helping for the past 2 months. They worked in companionable silence, the ancient dance of tending fire. Add wood. Wait. Check the temperature cones. Add more wood. Watch the color of the smoke. Listen to the sound of the draft. As the hours passed, as the kiln grew hotter, Kenji found himself thinking about all the firings he'd done. All the times he'd stood here, feeding this kiln, hoping this would be the time. All the anxiety, all the anticipation, all the crushing disappointment when the kiln was opened and the special bowl emerged imperfect yet again. What if he'd been asking the wrong question all along? Not, can I create the perfect bowl? But can I be present with what's actually happening? Not, will this firing give me what I want? But what will this firing give me? By the second day, the kiln was roaring. The temperature in the final chamber was approaching 1,300 degrees Celsius. The pottery inside was undergoing its transformation, clay becoming stone, glaze melting and flowing, ash from the wood fire landing on surfaces and creating natural patterns no human hand could plan. Kenji fed the fire and released expectations with each piece of wood. At least, he tried to. The habit of hope, of attachment, of needing things to turn out a certain way, that habit was strong. 40 years strong. But every time he noticed himself thinking about the special bowl, about how it might turn out. He would bring his attention back to the present moment. The fire, the wood in his hands, the heat on his face, the crack and roar of combustion. This, just this. Now, on the third day, they brought the temperature to its peak and then let the fire die. The kiln would need several days to cool before they could open it. This was the hardest part. The waiting, the not knowing, the suspense of what the fire had created or destroyed. Kenji and Yuki sat outside the workshop, drinking tea, watching the kiln sit silent and hot, cooling slowly. The evening was beautiful, spring was turning to summer, and the air was soft, full of the scent of wisteria blooming on the arbor by the house. "Thank you," Kenji said suddenly. "For what?" "For helping me see differently. For the past 2 months." For he paused, not sure how to say it. "For reminding me what matters." Yuki smiled. "The pottery, the being here, the doing the work." The he gestured helplessly at the kiln, the workshop, the mountains beyond. All of it. Not the outcome. The process. I forgot that. I was so focused on the destination that I stopped noticing the journey. That's very poetic. Father. He laughed, a sound that surprised him. He hadn't laughed in months. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation as a grumpy old potter to maintain." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Stars emerged. The kiln ticked and creaked as it cooled, settling into itself. Somewhere in that darkness and heat, the bowls waited, including bowl 417. But for the first time in 40 years, Kenji wasn't counting the hours until he could open the kiln. He was just here, now, drinking tea with his daughter, feeling the spring air on his skin, being alive. 5 days later, they opened the kiln. The usual mix of outcomes. Some pieces came out beautifully. Some had minor flaws. A few were complete failures. Kenji unpacked each piece, wrapping them in cloth, noting their qualities and quirks. The rice bowls had good color. The sake cups were well formed. The serving dishes had nice ash deposits. And then he reached bowl 417. He unwrapped it carefully, held it up to the light. The glaze had fired well, creating the soft orange peel texture characteristic of good Shino. The ash had fallen in beautiful patterns across the surface. The form had survived the firing without warping. By any objective measure, it was a successful bowl. Maybe even an exceptional bowl. But it wasn't perfect. There was a slight asymmetry to the lip. A small bubble in the glaze on one side. The color was beautiful, but not quite the color he'd envisioned. In the past, this would have devastated him. Another failure. Bowl 417, joining the 416 before it on the shelf of disappointment. But now, holding it, Kenji felt something different. He felt tenderness. This bowl had been made by his aching hands. It had survived the fire. It had become itself not perfect, but complete. It would hold tea. Someone would cradle it in their palms, feeling its warmth, appreciating its beauty, using it to support their moment of quiet presence. "It's beautiful," Yuki said, looking over his shoulder. "It's not perfect. No, it's better. It's real." Kenji turned the bowl in his hands, seeing it from all angles. The asymmetry made it interesting. The glaze bubble added character. The color was its own color, not the color he'd imagined, but lovely in its own right. For 40 years, he'd been trying to make a bowl that matched an image in his mind. And in doing so, he'd rejected hundreds of actual bowls, real, physical, beautiful bowls, because they didn't match the dream. But the dream was just thought, just imagination. These bowls were real. They existed. They had weight and texture and color and presence. They were here. He could spend the rest of his life chasing the dream, making himself miserable with the gap between vision and reality. Or he could be here, with his aching hands and his honest work and his actual bowls, imperfect, beautiful, complete. "I think," Kenji said slowly, "I'm going to put this one in the shop. For sale. Not as a special piece, just as a tea bowl. A good tea bowl. See who it finds." Yuki smiled. And the shelf of failures, Kenji looked at that shelf. 416 bowls. 40 years of work. Those go in the shop too. All of them. Let's see if the world appreciates them more than I did. People will love them, Yuki said with certainty. Maybe, maybe not. But either way, they are what they are. I made them. They exist. That's enough. He set bowl 417 gently on the table. His hands hurt. They would hurt tomorrow and the day after and for all the remaining days he had. But the hurt was just hurt. It didn't mean failure. It meant he'd used his hands fully. He'd spent them in service of the work. He'd shown up, again and again, for 40 years, and maybe that was the perfection he'd been seeking all along. Not a perfect bowl, but a perfect showing up. Not a flawless outcome, but a faithful process. Not achieving the dream, but honoring the reality of what was actually here, in his aching hands, in his workshop, in his life. We carry dreams that become prisons. We hold visions of how things should be, and those visions prevent us from seeing how things actually are. The perfect relationship, the perfect body, the perfect career, the perfect moment of enlightenment. And in chasing these perfections, we reject what's actually here. The real relationship with its quirks and conflicts. The real body with its aches and asymmetries. The real career with its compromises and complications. The real moment with its ordinariness and incompleteness. Kenji spent 40 years rejecting reality because it didn't match his vision. 416 bowls, each one beautiful in its own way. Each one dismissed as failure because it didn't conform to an image in his mind. Think about how much suffering that created, how much joy he missed, how many moments of satisfaction he pushed away because they weren't the satisfaction he'd decided he should have. This is what attachment looks like in daily life. Not the dramatic attachments to people or possessions, but the subtle attachment to how we think things should be, the constant measuring of reality against imagination and finding reality wanting. The bowl should be lighter. The body should be thinner. The relationship should be easier. The work should be more fulfilling. The meditation should be deeper. On and on. This endless rejection of what is in favor of what should be. And the tighter we hold to our vision of perfection, the more we suffer. Because reality will never match it exactly. There will always be asymmetry. Always be flaws. Always be the gap between what we imagined and what actually emerges from the fire of living. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. Kenji didn't stop making pottery. He didn't stop caring about quality. He didn't abandon his craft. He let go of the crushing weight of needing reality to match his imagination. He let go of the standard he was using to reject hundreds of beautiful bowls. He let go of measuring his entire life's work against one impossible ideal. And in letting go, he found what he'd been seeking all along, not the perfect bowl, but presence with the actual bowls. Not the fantasy, but the reality. Not someday when he finally got it right, but now, with his aching hands and his honest work and his imperfect, complete creations. Consider what you're holding on to that's preventing you from being here. Maybe it's a vision of who you should be by now. Maybe it's a standard you're using to judge yourself. Maybe it's a dream that's become a weapon you use against your actual life. What would happen if you set it down? Not forever. Not as total abandonment. Just for now. Just for this moment. What if you let reality be what it is without immediately comparing it to what it should be? Your body is like Kenji's bowls. Not perfect. Not matching some ideal. But here, real, alive, breathing, holding you through this life. Can you appreciate it as it is, rather than rejecting it for how it fails to match your vision? Your life is like Kenji's bowls. Not the life you imagined at 20. Not the perfect unfolding you were promised. But this life, the one you're actually living, with its asymmetries and flaws and unexpected beauty, can you meet it as it is? Let your grip soften. Feel the blanket's texture. Hear the quiet sounds of night. Notice your breath, imperfect and perfect at once. This moment isn't failing to be some other moment. It's complete as itself. You're not failing to be someone else. You're complete as yourself. Nothing needs to change before you can rest. Rest is already here, waiting beneath your need for things to be different. Just this, just as it is. Already whole, already enough. Breathe in what is. Breathe out what should be. Let the weight of perfection drift away like smoke. Let your body sink deeper into support. And as grasping loosens into allowing, we turn toward a mountain hermitage, where a different kind of release waits in the snow. In the mountains of Korea, where winter came early and stayed late, where snow could fall from October to April, and the wind carried voices from peaks no human had ever climbed, there stood a small hermitage. It was barely more than a hut, 4 stone walls, a roof of wooden shingles weighted down with rocks, a single room with a sleeping platform, a small altar, and a fire pit. No electricity, no running water, just stone and wood and the mountain itself. A monk named Woo-myung had lived in this hermitage for 11 years. He was 51 years old now, though he'd stopped thinking much about age. Time moved differently on the mountain. Seasons mattered more than years. The quality of light mattered more than the date. Whether the spring water was flowing or frozen mattered more than whether it was Tuesday or Thursday. Woo-myung had come to this hermitage after 20 years in a monastery down in the valley. 20 years of communal practice, morning chanting, group meditation, taking meals in silence with 100 other monks, studying sutras, attending to the endless maintenance tasks that kept a large monastery functioning. He'd been a good monk, diligent, serious, respected, but something had been missing. Or maybe not missing, maybe there had been too much. Too many voices, too many rituals, too many layers of tradition and structure between him and the direct experience he was seeking. He'd felt like a man trying to see the moon by reading descriptions of it. The descriptions were beautiful, accurate, But they weren't the moon. So he'd asked permission to become a hermit, to live alone on the mountain, to practice without mediation. His teacher had granted permission reluctantly. The mountain is harsh, the teacher had said. You'll be completely alone. No one to encourage you when practice is difficult. No one to check if you're deluding yourself. It's easy to go wrong in isolation. I understand, Wolmyong had said. Do you? The teacher had asked. You've never truly been alone. You've always had the monastery, the schedule, the bell calling you to practice. Up there, you'll have only yourself. And the mountain. Are you sure you want this? I'm sure, Wolmyong had said. And at the time, he had been. That was 11 years ago. 11 years of solitude. 11 years of silence, broken only by wind and birds, and his own voice chanting. 11 years of meditation without anyone watching, without anyone knowing if he sat for 1 hour or 6 or not at all. 11 years of carrying water from the spring, gathering firewood, growing a small garden in summer, making his meager supplies last through the long winters. For the first few years, it had been not easy, but clear. He'd wake before dawn, sit in meditation, chant, eat his simple meal, tend to necessary tasks, sit in meditation again, walk the mountain paths, sit again, sleep, day after day, week after week, season after season. The structure he'd left behind in the monastery, he'd recreated here in solitude. He'd thought that without the monastery's external form, he would find the essential practice. But instead, he just built an invisible monastery around himself, with himself as both the monk and the abbot, both the student and the teacher. And gradually, over the years, the practice had become. He wasn't sure how to describe it. Not worse, not unsuccessful, but increasingly effortful, increasingly joyless. He still sat in meditation every day, but it felt like obligation, not inspiration. He still chanted the sutras, but the words had become sounds without meaning. He still did walking meditation on the mountain paths, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in loops of thought, barely present to the trees and stones and sky. Lately, the past year, especially Wolmyong, had been troubled by a question he couldn't shake. What am I doing here? 11 years on this mountain. And what did he have to show for it? He wasn't enlightened. He hadn't had any great awakening. His mind was still filled with thoughts, desires, aversion, judgments. He still got cold and uncomfortable during long sits. He still felt lonely sometimes. He still worried about whether he had enough firewood for winter. He was still just himself, the same person who'd climbed this mountain 11 years ago, just older, more weathered, more isolated. This morning, a late autumn morning with the first serious snow of the season falling, Wolmyong sat on his meditation cushion and couldn't make himself begin. He just sat there, looking at the snow falling outside the single window. Large flakes, coming down heavily. This snow would last. Winter was here. He had enough supplies for the winter. Barely. Rice, dried vegetables, oil, enough firewood if he was careful. He knew how to survive up here. 11 winters had taught him that, but knowing he would survive and wanting to survive were different things. What am I doing here? The question returned, insistent. 11 years of trying to find something, and all he'd found was that trying itself was the problem. All the effort, all the discipline, all the structure, it wasn't leading anywhere. It was just effort, discipline, structure. He thought about the monastery down in the valley. Right now, the monks would be finishing morning meditation. They'd be filing into the dining hall for breakfast. There would be warmth from the heating system, hot tea, the sound of 100 people existing together in mindful silence, community, connection, shared purpose. What had he been thinking, coming up here? That isolation would bring clarity, that removing himself from relationship would reveal some essential truth. He'd traded the richness of community for what? For this, a cold stone room, a solitary practice that had become hollow, the sound of his own voice chanting to no one. For the first time in 11 years, Wolmyong allowed himself to think the thought he'd been avoiding. I've made a mistake. I should go back down the mountain. The thought brought relief and shame in equal measure. Relief, because it meant this could end. He could leave. He could return to the monastery, admit his failure, take up communal practice again. But shame, because it meant admitting that 11 years had been wasted, that he'd been wrong, that the mountain had defeated him. He stood up from his cushion, abandoning even the pretense of meditation. He paced the small room. 4 steps, one direction, 4 steps back, like a prisoner in a cell of his own making. Outside, the snow continued to fall. It was beautiful, he noticed distantly. The way it softened everything, made the mountain gentler, quieter. Already several inches had accumulated. By tomorrow, the path down the mountain would be difficult. In a few days, if the snow continued, the path would be impossible until spring. Wolmyong stopped pacing. He was at a decision point. If he was going to leave, he needed to leave now. Today, before the snow made leaving impossible, he could pack his few belongings, walk down the mountain, arrive at the monastery by evening. Tell his old teacher, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please take me back. Or he could stay, commit to another winter, another season of solitude, of practice that felt increasingly meaningless, of sitting in this stone room watching snowfall while wondering what the point of any of it was. He looked at his few possessions, his meditation cushion, his worn robes, his single bowl, a few books, his altar with its simple Buddha statue. Everything he owned could fit in a small bag. How had his life become so small? But even as he thought about packing, about leaving, he felt something in his chest resist. Not the resistance of obligation or duty. Something else. Something that didn't have words yet. He put on his warmest robe and his straw sandals and his conical hat. He stepped out into the falling snow. The cold hit him immediately. His breath emerged as white clouds. The snow was already ankle-deep and still falling. He began walking, not on the path down the mountain, but on the small trail that led to his favorite meditation spot, a flat rock overlooking the valley, where he could see for miles on clear days. Today was not a clear day. Visibility was perhaps 100 feet. The world had been reduced to falling snow, dark trees, white ground. Wolmyong walked through this reduced world, his feet leaving the first tracks in fresh snow. He reached the rock and brushed off the snow accumulating on its surface. He sat, not in formal meditation posture, just sitting, his legs dangling over the edge, his hat and shoulders collecting snow. From here, on clear days, he could see the monastery in the valley, could see the temple roofs, the fields around it, the river, could see the place he'd left. But today, he could see nothing, just whiteness, just snow erasing the world. And sitting there, in the cold, in the snow, something began to shift in Wolmyong. All this time, 11 years he'd been trying to meditate correctly, trying to practice diligently, trying to find enlightenment, trying to become someone different, someone better, someone worthy of these 11 years of effort. But the snow falling on him now didn't try. It just fell. The mountain beneath him didn't try to be a mountain. It just was. The trees didn't try to be trees. They stood in the snow, being exactly what they were, and that was enough. What if he stopped trying, not as giving up, not as defeat, but as release? What if he stopped trying to be a better monk, a more enlightened person, someone who could justify 11 years on a mountain? What if he just was what he was, a 51-year-old man sitting on a rock in the snow, breathing cold air, alive in this moment, not particularly special, not particularly realized, just here? The thought was terrifying and liberating at once. All the structure he'd built, the meditation schedule, the practice routine, the invisible monastery he'd constructed around himself, what if he let it all go? Not abandoned the practice, but released the grasping at practice. Not stopped meditating, but stopped needing meditation to produce something. Not left the mountain, but stopped needing the mountain to mean something. He'd come up here seeking freedom, but he'd brought his prison with him. The prison of self-improvement, the prison of spiritual ambition, the prison of needing to become something other than what he was. Snow accumulated on his hat, his shoulders, his lap. He was getting cold. He should go back to the hermitage, start a fire, get warm. But he stayed a little longer, feeling the cold, feeling the snow, feeling what it was to be alive on a mountain in winter with nowhere to get to and nothing to prove. An image came to him from the sutras. The Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, not trying to become enlightened, just sitting, present, here. When realization came, it wasn't because he'd tried hard enough. It was because he'd stopped trying. He'd stopped running toward and stopped running from. He'd just been. Wolmyong had been running for 11 years, running from the monastery, from community, from the structures he thought were preventing realization. But he'd been running towards something too, towards some imagined state of awakening, toward becoming someone worthy of praise, toward justifying his choice to isolate himself on this mountain. And all that running had exhausted him, had made his practice joyless, had turned what should have been direct experience into another form of performance, even though there was no one to perform for except himself. What if he stopped running? What if he just sat in the snow? He didn't have an answer. But sitting there, he felt something loosen in his chest. Some tight knot that had been there so long, he'd stopped noticing it. It wasn't dissolving completely, but it was softening, loosening its grip. He stood up, brushed snow from his robes, turned back toward the hermitage. His tracks from coming were already filling with new snow. By tomorrow, they'd be gone completely, erased as if he'd never walked this path, which felt right somehow. Nothing permanent. Everything constantly being erased and renewed. Back at the hermitage, He started a fire. The small room gradually warmed. He heated water for tea, sat holding the warm cup, feeling the heat seep into his cold hands. He didn't know what would happen next. Maybe he would stay on the mountain. Maybe he would leave in the spring. Maybe his practice would transform into something new. Maybe it would continue to feel hollow, and he'd have to make peace with that. He didn't know. But for the first time in 11 years, maybe for the first time in his entire life of practice, he felt okay with not knowing. Okay with being exactly where he was. Okay with being who he was, not a great hermit, not an enlightened master, just a monk who'd spent 11 years on a mountain and was still figuring out what that meant. That night, he didn't follow his usual routine. He didn't sit for the prescribed number of hours. He didn't chant at the prescribed times. Instead, he sat when he felt moved to sit. He watched the fire. He listened to the wind. He lay down when he was tired, without worrying about whether he'd practiced enough. And something strange happened. Without the structure, without the obligation, without the need for it to mean something, the practice became alive again. Not as duty, as response, as simple presence with what was actually here. He sat in meditation for a while, and it was just sitting. No achieving, no goal, just the experience of sitting, of breathing, of being present. When thoughts arose, he didn't fight them. When his body became uncomfortable, he didn't force it to stay still. He just noticed everything, without needing it to be different, without needing himself to be different. Later, lying on his sleeping platform, listening to wind howl around the hermitage, Woo-myung realized something. He'd been asking the wrong question. Not, what am I doing here, but can I be here, in this moment, in this body, in this life, exactly as it is. Not someday when he'd achieved something. Not after he'd proven something. Now. Just now. The snow continued falling all night. By morning, the world was transformed. Everything white and new. The path down the mountain completely covered. The decision made by weather, not by him. He would stay, at least until spring. But now it felt different. Not like imprisonment, like being exactly where he was, which was the only place he could be. He made tea, sat by the window watching snow fall from low grey clouds, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not enlightenment, not some great realization, just peace. Simple, ordinary peace. The peace of not fighting what was. The peace of not needing to be anywhere else. The peace of an ordinary morning in an ordinary life. Snow falling, tea steaming, breath moving in and out. Nothing special, and therefore perfect. The spiritual path can become another form of ambition. We trade worldly success for spiritual success. But the driving force is the same, the belief that we're not enough as we are, that we need to become something else, achieve something more, prove our worth through accomplishment. And so we practice, but with grasping. We meditate, but with agenda. We seek freedom, but our seeking is itself a form of bondage. Woo-myung spent 11 years trying to find what was already there. Present, available, not hidden in some advanced state of consciousness, but here, in the simple experience of being alive. Snow falling, tea warming cold hands, wind howling around stone walls. Nothing needed to be added to these experiences to make them spiritual. They were already complete. He just couldn't see it because he was too busy trying to become someone who could see it. This is the paradox at the heart of practice. We need effort to get started, discipline to keep going, structure to support our intention. But at some point, effort itself becomes the obstacle. The trying becomes the problem. We're so focused on getting somewhere that we can't be where we are. We're so busy becoming that we can't simply be. The release Wol-Myung experienced wasn't about abandoning practice. He didn't stop sitting meditation. He didn't renounce his vows. He just stopped making practice into a project of self-improvement, stopped needing it to produce results, stopped measuring his worth by his spiritual progress. He let practice be what it actually was, a way of being present, not a way of becoming someone else. Think about your own relationship to growth and change. Maybe you're not a hermit on a mountain, but you're probably trying to improve something, trying to be healthier, more mindful, more productive, more spiritual, more something. And that trying is exhausting. It creates a constant state of not enough yet, of someday, when, of needing to be different before you can rest. What if you stopped trying, not as giving up on care or attention or practice, but as releasing the grip of needing to be other than what you are? What if healing wasn't about fixing yourself, but about accepting yourself? What if peace wasn't an achievement, but a recognition of what's already here? Wol-Myung's moment on the rock, in the snow, was the moment he stopped running from his loneliness by keeping busy with practice, stopped running towards some imagined awakening that would finally make him acceptable. He just sat in the snow, cold, alive, ordinary. And in that ordinariness, he found what he'd been seeking. You don't need to go to a mountain. You don't need to practice for 11 years. The release is available right now, in this breath, in this moment, not as something achieved, but as something allowed. The grip loosening, the trying softening, the constant pressure to be different, to be better, to be more releasing like snow from an overburdened branch. Your practice, whatever it is, whether meditation or therapy or exercise or creative work, it doesn't have to prove anything. It doesn't have to transform you into someone worthy. You can let it be simpler. Just this activity, just this attention, just this moment of being present with what's here, not for some future payoff, not to become someone else, just because this is what's happening now. Feel your body settle deeper into rest. Notice how breathing happens without trying, how your heart beats without ambition, how life continues without needing you to be anyone special. The snow falls, whether anyone is enlightened or not. The mountain stands whether anyone achieves anything or not. And you are here, breathing, alive, already complete, already enough, right now. Nothing to prove, nowhere to get to. Just this, just here, just now. Let the weight of becoming dissolve into the simplicity of being. Feel how much space opens when you stop trying to be different. And as effort releases into allowing, we travel now to a kitchen where a grandmother discovers that the sacred was never hiding in the dramatic moments, but living quietly in her daily hands. In a Theravada monastery in rural Thailand, where the air was thick with humidity and the sound of cicadas, where saffron-robed monks walked barefoot on morning alms rounds and the temple bells marked the passage of each day, there lived a woman named Marley. She was 72 years old, small and wiry, her face deeply creased from a lifetime of sun and smiles. For 30 years, Marley had been the monastery cook, preparing meals for the 20 monks who lived there and the lay practitioners who came for meditation retreats. Mali was not a nun. She had not taken ordination vows. She had not studied the sutras extensively. She could not explain complex Buddhist philosophy. She could barely read. But she could cook, and cook she did 3 times a day, 7 days a week, for 3 decades. Rice and curries, soups and vegetables, simple food prepared with care, served at the proper times, supporting the monks' practice and the monastery's life. Most people didn't pay much attention to Mali. She was part of the monastery's functioning, like the water pump or the meditation hall or the ancient Bodhi tree in the courtyard. Necessary but unremarkable. The monks would thank her for meals, sometimes compliment the food, but mostly they simply ate what she prepared and returned to their practice, the real practice, the important practice of meditation and study and realization. Mali didn't mind being overlooked. She'd never sought attention. She'd come to the monastery 30 years ago, after her husband died, after her children had grown and moved to Bangkok for work. She'd had nowhere else to go and no particular skills except cooking. The abbot at the time had needed a cook. It was practical arrangement, nothing spiritual about it. She would cook. The monastery would provide her a small room and basic support. Fair exchange. But something had happened over the years. Something Mali herself didn't fully understand. The cooking had become not just cooking. The kitchen had become not just a kitchen. The repetitive work of preparing food had become something that she couldn't quite name, but could feel as clearly as she felt the heat from her cooking fire. This morning, like every morning, Mali woke at 4 o'clock. Her body woke automatically now, without need for an alarm, trained by 30 years of the same schedule. She rose from her sleeping mat, dressed in her simple clothes, loose cotton pants, a worn shirt, a cloth wrapped around her waist as an apron. She walked through the pre-dawn darkness to the kitchen, a separate building near the main monastery, and lit the fire in her clay stove. The kitchen was her domain, simple and functional. Large pots hanging on the wall, a wooden counter worn smooth by decades of use, baskets of vegetables delivered yesterday by lay supporters, containers of rice, oil, spices, everything in its place, everything familiar. She started the rice first, always rice first. Measure the grains, wash them 3 times, add water, set the pot on the fire. While the rice cooked, she would prepare the other dishes. Today, a mild curry with vegetables, a soup with mushrooms and greens, fresh fruit cut and arranged. Simple food, but made with attention. As Mali worked, her hands moved through motions they'd performed thousands of times. Chop the lemongrass, pound the garlic and chili in the mortar, stir the curry paste in hot oil. These movements were so familiar that her mind didn't need to direct them. Her hands knew what to do. And in that knowing, in that effortless movement, something opened. Mali didn't think about it as meditation. She didn't use that word. She wasn't trying to achieve anything or cultivate anything. She was just cooking. But somewhere in the cooking, her usual sense of being Mali, the woman with a history, with worries, with preferences and aversions, with a self that needed protecting and promoting, that sense would fade. Not disappear completely, just loosen. Become less solid, less important. When she chopped vegetables, she was not Mali chopping vegetables. There was just chopping, just the knife meeting the cutting board, just the smell of fresh herbs, just the movements happening. When she stirred the curry, she was not Marley stirring curry. There was just stirring, just the spoon moving through thick liquid, just the heat rising from the pot, just the changes happening as ingredients transformed into food. Her grandson, who visited sometimes from Bangkok, had once asked her, "Grandmother, don't you get bored cooking the same things every day for 30 years?" Marley had thought about this. "No," she'd said finally. "It's never the same. Every morning is different. The fire burns differently. The vegetables are different. My hands feel different. The air is different. I am different. How can it be boring when everything is always new?" Her grandson had looked puzzled, the way young people often looked when old people said things that didn't fit into categories they understood. He'd changed the subject, talking instead about his job in the city, his ambitions, his plans. Marley had listened and nodded and thought, he is looking for something far away. Someday maybe he will see it was always right here. This morning, as the curry simmered and the rice steamed, Marley heard voices from the meditation hall. The monks were finishing their pre-dawn sitting. Soon they would walk to the dining hall for breakfast. She had maybe 15 minutes to finish preparations. She worked steadily, not rushing but not wasting movement. Cut the fruit: mango, papaya, banana. Arrange it on the serving plate. Taste the curry, add a little more palm sugar to balance the spice. Check the rice, perfect. Each grain separate and fluffy. Ladle the soup into the large serving bowl. Carry everything to the dining hall, setting it on the serving table while the hall was still empty. Then she stepped back. Her part was done. The food was ready. Now it would be received, or not received, eaten with appreciation, or eaten without thought. That was not her concern. She'd done what was hers to do. As the monks began filing in, Marley returned to the kitchen to clean up. This was her favorite part. Actually, the cleaning. The dining hall would be quiet, the monks eating in silence, and she would be here in her kitchen, washing pots, wiping counters, returning everything to order. There was something deeply satisfying about this. The cycle complete. Dirty, becoming clean. Used, becoming ready to be used again. As she washed a large pot, her hands in warm soapy water, she noticed a thought arise. My hands are getting old. Look at these spots, these wrinkles, these joints that ache when it rains. And then she noticed herself noticing the thought. There were the hands, old, spotted, wrinkled, sometimes aching. And there was the thought about the hands, the story, the judgment, the identification. And there was the awareness that noticed both the hands and the thought. Three different things, though usually they felt collapsed into one. Marley wasn't trying to be philosophical. She hadn't read about this in books. But 30 years of cooking had taught her something subtle. When she was fully absorbed in the work, there was no Marley thinking about cooking. There was just cooking happening. And in those moments, she wasn't her thoughts about herself. She wasn't her story. She wasn't the person who needed this or worried about that. She was just awareness, just presence, just the space in which cooking was happening. But then thought would return, have to remember to order more palm sugar. I wonder if her daughter would visit this month. Notice the ache in her back, and suddenly there was Marley again. Marley with her concerns and memories and identity. But even that, Mali, was just more thoughts, more stories, arising in awareness. It was like clouds and sky, Mali thought. The clouds were her thoughts, her identity, her sense of being Mali. They came and went, changed shape, sometimes blocked the view. But underneath, always, was the sky. Vast, clear, unchanged by the clouds that passed through it. And she was not the clouds. She was the sky. Or rather, she was the awareness in which both clouds and sky appeared. This understanding had come slowly, not through studying but through simply showing up day after day. Cooking, cleaning, cooking, cleaning. Watching the mind do its thing, make stories, create problems, spin narratives, and watching all of that happen in a space that was larger than the stories, that wasn't touched by them even as they played out. The pot was clean. She set it aside to dry. Moved to the next pot. Mali, she turned. The abbot stood in the kitchen doorway. Ajahn Sumedho was 65 years old, had been abbot for 12 years. He was kind and wise, and the monks and lay practitioners loved him. He treated Mali with respect, which not all abbots had. Some had treated her as a servant, but Ajahn Sumedho seemed to understand that her work had its own dignity. Yes, Ajahn, the breakfast was wonderful. The curry had a brightness to it today. Something special. Mali smiled. Just curry. Same as always. Perhaps, but I wanted to thank you. And to ask, would you consider giving a Dharma talk? Mali nearly dropped the pot she was holding. Me? I don't know Dharma. I didn't study. I can barely read the sutras. You know Dharma better than half the monks here. Ajahn Sumedho said gently. You just don't know that you know it. I watch you work. I've watched you for 12 years. You move like meditation. You live what we're all trying to achieve. I just cook. Yes. Exactly. You just cook. No extra. No self-consciousness. No performance. You show up. You do the work. You let it go. Do you know how rare that is? Most of us are so caught up in being someone who practices, we forget to actually practice. We're trying so hard to become enlightened that we miss the enlightenment right here in daily activity. Mali felt uncomfortable with this praise. It made her self-conscious, which was exactly the opposite of what he was describing. I don't think I can give a talk. I wouldn't know what to say. Then don't give a talk. Just let people watch you cook. Invite the lay practitioners into the kitchen tomorrow during morning preparation. Let them see what real practice looks like. Mali wanted to refuse, but Ajahn Sumedho was asking, and she'd always respected his guidance. So she nodded. If you think it would help. The next morning, Mali woke at 4 as always. But when she reached the kitchen, there were already 6 people waiting, lay practitioners who'd come for the weekly meditation retreat. They looked at her expectantly, as if she was going to perform some magic, reveal some secret. I'm just going to cook, Mali said. You can watch if you want, or help if you know how. But I'm not doing anything special. She lit the fire, started the rice, began preparing the curry, and tried to ignore the fact that people were watching her. But their presence made her self-conscious. She noticed herself noticing them, noticed herself thinking, am I doing this right? Am I demonstrating something? Is this what they expected? And noticing those thoughts, she recognized them as the clouds. Thoughts about being watched, about performing, about whether she was doing it right. Just clouds, passing through the sky of awareness. They felt real, felt important, but they weren't the fundamental thing. The fundamental thing was the awareness itself, the space in which these thoughts arose. So she let them be. Let the self-consciousness be there. Let the performance anxiety be there. And kept cooking. Hands chopping lemongrass. Mortar and pestle pounding garlic. Oil heating in the pot. All of it happening, with or without her commentary about it. After a while, maybe 20 minutes, the self-consciousness faded. Or maybe it was still there, but she wasn't identified with it anymore. There was just cooking, just hands moving, just ingredients transforming, and 6 people sitting quietly against the wall, watching. One of them, a young woman, raised her hand tentatively. "Can I ask a question?" Marley nodded. "How do you stay so present? How do you not get distracted or lost in thought?" Marley stirred the curry, considering, "I do get distracted. I do get lost in thought. Happens all the time. But the thoughts are not me. They're just weather. They come. They go. Underneath, something is always here. Always watching. Always present. I don't try to stop the thoughts. I just don't believe them so much anymore." "But how did you learn that?" "By cooking. By washing dishes. By doing the same things 10,000 times until I noticed the cooking is always happening. The thoughts about the cooking are always changing. So which one is more real? Which one is what I actually am?" The young woman looked thoughtful. Another person, an older man, spoke up. "Is this what meditation is supposed to feel like? Just doing things? I sit and try to focus on my breath and my mind goes crazy. I thought I was doing it wrong." "Your mind goes crazy in sitting," Marley said. "My mind goes crazy in cooking. But the crazy mind is not the problem. The problem is thinking you are the crazy mind. You are not your thoughts. You are what notices the thoughts. Big difference." She tasted the curry, added more palm sugar. "When you sit, you think, I am meditating. I am trying to concentrate. I am failing to concentrate. All thoughts. But who is noticing those thoughts? That one, the noticer, that's who you really are. And that one never fails. That one is always present. That one is always okay." Marley had never said so many words about practice in her life. She felt a little embarrassed, like she'd overstepped. Who was she to teach? But the people were listening with real attention, real hunger for understanding. "So we just do things? That's the practice?" another person asked. "You do things with attention, with presence. Not trying to be present, that's just more trying. More just noticing when you're here and when you're lost in story. Over and over. 10,000 times. 20,000 times. Until you start to recognize the story is not you. The worry is not you. The wanting and not wanting is not you. You are the space in which all that happens. The awareness. The sky, not the clouds." She pulled the pot of curry off the heat. "Now help me carry this to the dining hall. Breakfast is ready." As they worked together, carrying food, setting out serving spoons, Marley felt something she couldn't name. Not pride that was just another cloud, but something simpler. Gratitude, maybe. that her simple work had somehow become a teaching. That 30 years of cooking had taught her what all the books and lectures tried to teach but couldn't. Quite, because understanding only came through doing, through showing up, through the daily repetition that slowly wore away the sense of being someone separate from life itself. Later, after breakfast was served and eaten and cleaned up after, Marley returned to her small room. She lay down on her mat for a short rest before starting lunch preparations. Her body ached. It always ached now. 72 years was 72 years. The body wore out. Someday it would wear out completely, and that would be fine. But lying there, feeling the ache, she noticed there was the sensation of aching. And there were thoughts about the sensation. This means I'm getting old. This means my body is failing. And there was awareness, noticing both the sensation and the thoughts. 3 different things. And she was not any of them. She was the space in which they all appeared, the sky that held the clouds, the awareness that held experience without being touched by it. This understanding didn't take away the ache, didn't make her young again, didn't change the facts of having an old body in a world where bodies age and eventually die. But it did change something essential about her relationship to those facts. They were just what was happening, not tragedy, not something wrong, just life doing what life does, arising, changing, passing away. And she was not the things that arose and passed away. She was what remained, what was always here, unchanging, unborn, undying, just awareness, just presence, just this, nothing special, and therefore everything. Most teachings about non-identification focus on not being attached to thoughts and emotions, which is true but only part of the story. The deeper teaching is recognizing what you actually are beneath all the thoughts and emotions. Not emptiness in the sense of absence, but spacious awareness, the fundamental consciousness in which all experience arises. Marley discovered this not through meditation on a cushion, but through meditation in daily work. Through showing up 10,000 times. Through doing the same things over and over until the doer dissolved and only the doing remained. And in that dissolution, she found what had been there all along, awareness itself, pure presence, the space that holds all experience but isn't touched by any of it. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's direct experience available to anyone willing to pay attention. Right now, there are sensations in your body. There are thoughts in your mind. There are sounds in the environment. But there's also the awareness that knows all of this. That awareness isn't your body, it notices your body. It isn't your thoughts, it notices your thoughts. It isn't any particular experience, it's the space in which all experiences appear. When Marley said, "I am not the clouds, I am the sky," she was pointing at this. Your personality, your history, your worries, your hopes, these are clouds. Real, but temporary. Constantly changing. And beneath them, unchanged by them, is the clear sky of awareness. That's what you actually are. Not the small separate self trying to navigate life, but the open, aware space in which a self appears along with everything else. This understanding brings profound freedom. Not because problems disappear, but because you realize you're not the problems. The body ages, that's a cloud. Thoughts arise saying, "I'm getting old. I'm running out of time." Those are clouds. But the awareness noticing both the aging and the thoughts about aging, that's the sky. And the sky doesn't age. The sky doesn't worry. The sky doesn't run out of time. The sky just is, eternally present, holding everything without grasping. releasing everything without aversion. Mali's hands were old and spotted and sometimes painful. But she wasn't her hands. She was the awareness noticing the hands, noticing the sensations, noticing the thoughts about the sensations, and that awareness was fine. That awareness was always fine. Not because it was elevated above difficulty, but because it was the space that held difficulty without being touched by it. You can recognize this for yourself. Not by achieving anything, not by becoming more spiritual, but by noticing what's already here. Right now, there's the sensation of breathing. Notice it. And now notice that something is noticing it. That noticer, that awareness, what is it? Is it your thoughts? No, because it's aware of your thoughts. Is it your body? No, because it's aware of your body. Is it anything you can point to? No, but it's undeniably here. Always here. The constant in the midst of constant change. This is what you are. Not the changing content of experience, but the unchanging awareness of experience. The sky, not the clouds. And recognizing this, you can rest. Because the sky doesn't need to become anything else. The sky doesn't need to improve itself. The sky doesn't need to achieve enlightenment. The sky is already free, already whole, already home. It just is. And so are you. Let your attention rest in awareness itself. Not looking at anything particular, just noticing the space in which everything appears. The breath arises in this space. Thoughts arise in this space. Sensations arise in this space. And this space, this awareness, this is what you are. Not small. Not limited. Not the story you've been telling yourself. Just this. Just here. Just now. Spacious. Open. Free. And as this recognition settles like snow on quiet ground, we turn toward one final story, where all the teachings dissolve into the simplest thing of all. On the coast of Vietnam, where the South China Sea met the land in a line of fishing villages that had existed for centuries, where wooden boats painted blue and red rested on beaches at low tide, where the smell of drying fish and salt water filled the air, there lived an old fisherman named Hai. He was 83 years old, though he'd long ago stopped counting years with any precision. What mattered was the tide, the wind, the season, the movement of fish beneath the water's surface. Hai had been fishing these waters for 70 years, since he was a boy of 13, learning from his father, learning from his grandfather, learning from the sea itself. He knew every rock and reef within 5 miles of shore, knew where the current ran fast and where it pooled in eddies, knew which fish appeared in spring and which in autumn, knew when storms were coming by the color of the clouds at dawn and the way birds flew. He had a small boat, very old, patched many times, painted and repainted until the layers of paint were thick as his thumb. He had nets, also old, mended countless times. He had strong hands despite his age, calloused and scarred, hands that knew rope and wood and fish. He had a small house on the beach, one room, where he lived alone since his wife died 5 years ago. This evening, like most evenings, Hai sat on the beach watching the sunset. His boat was pulled up on the sand behind him. His nets were spread out to dry. The day's catch had been brought to the market, not much, never much anymore, but enough. A few fish for himself, the rest sold to buy rice and vegetables and oil. The sun was touching the horizon now, turning the water gold and orange and red. Hai had seen this sight thousands of times, perhaps tens of thousands of times. Every evening of his life spent near the water, watching light change, watching day become night. And yet it was never boring, never the same twice. Tonight, the water was calm. Small waves lapped at the shore with a gentle rhythm. A few other boats dotted the beach, his neighbors, other fishermen, also finishing their day. Smoke rose from cooking fires in the village. Children's voices carried on the breeze, playing their last games before darkness, and dinner called them home. Hai felt his body settling into the sand, his back against a piece of driftwood, his legs stretched out before him, everything aching slightly, everything always ached slightly now. The body of an 83-year-old fisherman was not a comfortable body. It was a used body, worn out from work and weather and time. But it was his body, and it was still here, still breathing, still able to sit on this beach and watch this sunset. He thought about his wife, Lan. Not with grief anymore. Grief had softened over 5 years into something gentler. Just memory. Just presence. She had loved these sunsets too. They'd sat here together countless times, not talking much, just being together in the evening light. Now he sat here alone, but not alone, because she was still somehow present in the way the light fell on water, in the sound of waves, in the simple fact of being here in this place they'd shared. A young man walked past, one of the fishermen from down the beach. Hai didn't know him well. He was new to the village, come from the city, looking for simpler life. He'd bought a boat last year and was learning to fish. Learning badly, by the looks of it. His movements were still awkward, still fighting the boat instead of moving with it. The young man nodded to Hai. "Good evening, uncle." Hai nodded back. "Evening." The young man paused, seemed to want to say something. Finally, "Uncle, can I ask you something?" "Ask." "You've been fishing a long time." "Yes, long time." Do you ever get tired of it? The same thing every day? Wake up, go out in the boat, catch some fish, come back. Day after day, year after year. Doesn't it feel like you're just repeating the same day over and over? Hai looked at the young man. He was maybe 25, 30 years old. Old enough to be tired already. Young enough to not understand that tiredness was just another wave, coming and going like all waves. "Same day?" Hai said. "Never same day. Today the wind came from the east. Yesterday from the west. Today I caught 3 mackerel and a dozen sardines. Yesterday no mackerel, different fish. Today my left knee hurt. Yesterday my right shoulder. Today sunset is red. Yesterday it was orange." "How is same day?" The young man looked uncertain. "But the pattern is the same. Wake, fish, sleep. Wake, fish, sleep. Over and over. Don't you want to do something else? Something more?" "I don't know. More meaningful?" Hai was quiet for a long time. The sun was halfway below the horizon now. The sky was deepening into purple. A few stars were becoming visible. "You think fishing is not meaningful?" Hai asked finally. "I didn't mean, I just mean, doesn't it feel like you're not really going anywhere? Like your life is just the same small circle, repeated? Where should I go? I don't know. Somewhere. To see things. To do things. To make a mark. To be someone." "Ah," Hai said. He understood now. This young man was running from something, or running towards something. Either way, running, and tired from the running, even though he was still young. "Sit," Hai said, patting the sand beside him. The young man hesitated, then sat. They watched the sun finish its descent. The moment it disappeared, completely below the horizon, the way the sky held light even after the sun was gone. The first stars, then more stars. The sound of water, the smell of salt and seaweed, the cooling air, everything exactly as it was, moment by moment, nothing needing to be different. "You know what I learned," Hai said after a long silence. "From 70 years of fishing?" "What?" "That there is nowhere to go, no meaning to find, no someone to be. Just this. Just water and sky. Just boat and fish. Just breath and heartbeat. Just now, then next now, then next now. And that is enough. More than enough." "Is everything—" The young man frowned. "That sounds like giving up, does it? Maybe, or maybe is giving in. Not same thing. Giving up is stopping caring. Giving in is accepting what already is. I didn't give up fishing. I fish every day. But I gave in to being fisherman. Gave in to being old man on beach. Gave in to this life, this body, this moment. And when you give in like that, when you stop fighting what is, you find out something strange." "What?" "That what you were fighting wasn't even there. You were fighting thoughts, fighting ideas about what life should be. But life is just what it is. Sky and water, breath and body. Nothing more complicated than that. And nothing simpler." The young man was quiet, thinking. Hai could see he didn't fully understand. How could he? Understanding came from time, from repetition, from wearing yourself out, trying to be somewhere else, until finally you realized everywhere else is also just here. Every moment is also just now. "I should go," the young man said, standing. "Thank you for talking with me, Uncle. Welcome." Hai watched him walk away down the beach toward his own boat, his own small house, his own life that he was probably still trying to make into something other than what it was. Hai remained sitting. The sky was fully dark now, except for the glow on the western horizon. Stars everywhere. The Milky Way visible as it always was here, away from city lights, that river of stars flowing across the sky like a celestial version of the sea he fished. He thought about the young man's question. Doesn't it feel like you're just repeating the same day over and over? And he thought about his own life. 70 years of fishing. 25,000 days. Maybe more. Wake. Fish. Eat. Sleep. Wake. Fish. Eat. Sleep. The same pattern, repeated endlessly. But it was never the same. Each day was completely new. Each moment was unique. Each wave was itself, different from every other wave, even though they all looked similar from a distance. Each breath was its own breath. Each sunset, its own sunset. The mind wanted to make things the same, wanted to create categories and patterns and stories. My repetitive life, my boring routine, my small existence. But these were just thoughts, stories the mind told. The actual experience sitting here, feeling the cooling sand, watching stars, hearing waves that wasn't repetitive. That was completely fresh, completely alive, completely here. Hai had stopped believing the stories somewhere along the way. Not through effort or practice, just through time. Through sitting on this beach for tens of thousands of evenings and noticing the story about this evening is not the same as this evening itself. The thought I am an old fisherman with a small life is not the same as the actual experience of being alive right now. And when the stories fell away, what remained was so simple, so ordinary. Just this, the sound of water meeting land, the vast sky full of stars, the body sitting on sand, the breath moving in and out. Nothing special. And therefore everything, a memory surfaced. Hai was maybe 40 years old. A monk had visited the village, stayed for a few days. One evening, Hai had brought him some fish as an offering. They talked, sitting on this same beach, watching the same sunset. The monk had asked him, "Do you have a spiritual practice?" And Hai, confused by the question, had said, "I fish." "No, I mean, what do you do to cultivate your mind, to seek enlightenment?" "I fish," Hai had repeated. "Iman nets. I watch the sea. I sit on the beach." "Is this not practice?" The monk had smiled then, a smile that suggested he understood something Hai didn't. "It can be practice," the monk had said, "if you do it with awareness, with mindfulness, if you're present to each moment rather than lost in thought." Hai had nodded politely, but inside he'd thought, "I am always present. Where else would I be?" The fish don't wait for distracted fishermen. The sea doesn't forgive inattention. You are present or you drown, or you catch nothing, or you wreck your boat on the rocks. Presence is not practice, is survival. Now, 40 years later, Hai wondered if maybe he'd misunderstood the monk, or maybe the monk had misunderstood him, because presence wasn't something Hai cultivated. It wasn't a practice he did. It was just what was left when everything else fell away. When the stories stopped, when the trying stopped, when the needing life to be different stopped, what remained was just presence, just awareness, just being here. And that presence wasn't something he possessed, wasn't something he did. It was what he was, what everything was. The stars were being stars. The water was being water. And he was being Hai, which was just another way awareness was being aware. Life was being alive. His eyes were getting heavy. The night was fully arrived now. He should go inside, eat something, sleep. Tomorrow he would wake early, check his nets, maybe go out if the weather was good. Or maybe not. At 83, he fished when he felt able, rested when he didn't. The fish would be there tomorrow, or they wouldn't. He would catch them, or he wouldn't. Either way was fine. He stood slowly, feeling all 83 years in his knees and back, walked the short distance to his house, lit a small lamp, ate leftover rice and fish, lay down on his mat. Through the window, he could see stars, could hear the constant sound of waves, the same sound he'd fallen asleep to every night of his life, the same sound he'd heard his whole life, the same sound that had been here before he was born and would be here after he died. Eternal, unchanging, and yet never the same twice. Hai felt his breath slowing, his body relaxing into sleep. And just before consciousness faded, he had a thought, not really a thought, more like a recognition. This is it. This was always it. Nothing to find. Nowhere to go. No one to become. Just this. Just waves and stars and breath. Just the eternal present moment, wearing 10,000 faces, telling 10,000 stories, but always, underneath, just itself. Just this. Just here. Just now. Nothing special. Everything. The same thing. The only thing. The thing that had always been here and would always be here, whether he noticed it or not, whether he understood it or not, whether he called it enlightenment or just called it life. Just this. Just, in the very end, all the teachings point to the same place. Not to a state to achieve or a realization to have, but to the simple recognition of what's already here. The old fisherman knew this without knowing he knew it. He'd worn himself down through 70 years of simple living until there was nothing left but presence. No elaborate philosophy, no sophisticated practice, just the direct experience of being alive. Water and sky, breath and body, moment and moment and moment. This is where all the paths lead, if you follow them far enough. Not to something special, but to the ordinary revealed as miraculous. Not to somewhere else, but to here, finally here, without the filter of wanting it to be different. Not to some elevated state, but to the simple recognition that awareness itself is enough. That being alive is enough. That this moment, exactly as it is enough. You don't have to fish for 70 years to find this. You don't have to become old and worn out. You can recognize it now. The same presence that was in the fisherman is in you. The same awareness that watched sunsets for tens of thousands of evenings is watching your breath right now. It's not his awareness or your awareness, it's just awareness, expressing itself through different forms, but always the same awareness underneath. And recognizing this, you can rest. Finally rest. Not the rest of sleep, though that's here too, but the deeper rest of no longer trying to get somewhere, no longer trying to become someone, no longer fighting what is, just being what you already are, awareness watching life unfold, participating in it fully while somehow untouched by it, like water that takes every shape but never stops being water. The fisherman didn't need to remember these teachings tomorrow, didn't need to hold on to any insight or understanding, because it wasn't about knowing something, it was about being something, or rather, recognizing what you already are beneath all the knowing and not knowing, beneath all the understanding and confusion, beneath all the thoughts and stories. Just presence, just awareness, just this moment, and this moment, and this moment, each one complete in itself, each one the entire universe expressing itself exactly here, exactly now, exactly as it is. Nothing to remember, nothing to achieve, nothing to become. Just this, just breath, just the sound of waves that has always been here and will always be here. Just awareness, aware of itself, playing all the roles, wearing all the faces, but always underneath, just itself. Just this, just. Let your eyes close if they want to close. Let breath slow into its own rhythm. Let thoughts drift like clouds across a vast sky. Let the body sink deeper into the support beneath it. Let the day release its grip. Let consciousness soften into the space between waking and sleeping, where nothing needs to be held, nothing needs to be understood, nothing needs to be anything other than what it already is. The waves will still be here tomorrow. The stars will still shine. The breath will still move in and out. And awareness will still be aware, whether you're awake or asleep, whether you remember or forget, whether you understand or don't understand. It's always here. You are always here. Not going anywhere. Not becoming anything. Just this. Just being. Just the eternal present moment. Unchanging in its constant change. Always arriving at exactly where it already is. Rest now. Let go. Drift. Sleep. Forget everything you've heard tonight. Let it all dissolve like salt in water, becoming part of you without your remembering exactly how. Trust that what needs to remain will remain. Trust that what needs to release will release. Trust the vast awareness that holds everything, including you, including this moment, including all moments, always here, always now, always home. Just this. Just. And so we've traveled together through these hours, across centuries and mountains, through kitchens and meditation halls, beside gardens and oceans. We've met tea masters and sweepers, potters and hermits, scholars and cooks, gardeners and fishermen. Different lives, different circumstances, different struggles. But underneath, always the same teaching, always pointing back to this, to now, to the simple, miraculous fact of being alive. You've heard about ordinary mind, about letting go of perfection, about recognizing the patterns that keep you from rest. You've heard that you're already worthy, already complete, already home. Not someday, when you've achieved enough, or healed enough, or understood enough. Now, just as you are, breathing, being, here. Let these stories settle somewhere beneath thinking. You don't need to remember them. You don't need to understand them perfectly. They were just fingers pointing at the moon, and the moon is already shining on you right now, whether you see it clearly or not. The truth they pointed toward isn't in the words. It's in the silence between the words. It's in the space where you are right now, feeling the pillow beneath your head, noticing breath move through your body, being alive in this quiet moment. Tomorrow, you may wake and return to the same struggles, the same patterns, the same feeling that you're not quite where you should be. That's okay. That's just weather. Let it come. Let it go. Remember, if you remember anything, that underneath the weather, there's always sky. Underneath the doing, there's always being. Underneath the story of who you think you are, there's just awareness, just presence, just this eternal now that was never born and will never die. Rest now. Let the teachings dissolve. Let the stories fade. Let even the knowing fade. What remains when everything else has fallen away? Just this. Just breath. Just the sound of silence. Just being alive. Here. Now. Nothing special. And therefore everything. Sleep well. You are already home. You were always already home. There was never anywhere else to be. Good night.